Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Cabbage Head Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Had the Hamon Energy Quirk? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Midoriya Izuku was one of many children who had grown up in awe of the heroes who protected them from villains. People like the flame hero Endeavor, the fiber hero Best Jeanist, the chivalrous hero Crimson Riot, and so many others. Standing at the top of the pyramid, at the very pinnacle, was the #1 pro hero, All Might. To Izuku, All Might was more than just a person to stand in awe of. He was an idol, both a shining beacon standing above them all and a goal to strive for. Izuku wanted to become a hero just like All Might, a hero who saves everyone with a smile. To do that though, his quirk needed to awaken. Quirks were almost universal in the modern-day society. Over 80% of the world's population possessed a quirk of some description, whether it was a weak and/or minor one like turning a person's skin green or making their fingers act like lighters, to those powerful ones that could reshape the world around them like controlling the various elements or whatever powerful quirk All Might possessed. Quirks were mainly divided into 3 main categories: emitters, transformation, and mutation. Izuku really didn't care what kind of quirk he activated, only that he got one. His 4th birthday had come and gone and nothing had happened. It had been almost 6 months since then and Izuku was becoming worried, as was his mother, Inko. To be one of the 20% of the population without a quirk, a so-called quirkless individual, was to be a victim of discrimination and disdain, something that the older Midoriya wouldn't wish on anyone, let alone her only child. Please, give my son a quirk, she prayed every night as the 6-month deadline approached. It was still possible for a child to awaken their quirk up to 6 months after their 4th birthday, but almost impossible afterwards. The rare instances were for those who had quirks too powerful for their young bodies to withstand, which had a unique quirk factor that could be detected with a blood test. Please, give him a quirk, not for my sake, but for his. It would break my boy if he can't get a quirk. Midoriya Inko begged whatever power existed that controlled quirks. Please. Please. Whether it was from such sincere and desperate prayer from a mother who loved her son with every ounce of her being, or just the vagaries of chance, but the very day before 6 months had passed after Izuku's birthday, he awoke his own quirk. Playground, Dantuin Preschool, Mizudafu City. Izuku raced across the playground, with only the thought of escape in mind. His best friend, Bigo, Katsuki, had always been a very volatile person. For as long as Izuku had known him, which had been pretty much their entire lives, Kaken had always been the first to brag, to argue, and to start a fight. And ever since he was the first in their class to awaken his quirk explosion several months ago, those negative traits had only started to get worse. Explosion was a very powerful quirk, with a lot of potential in it, which had led a lot of people, both staff and students, to praise Katsuki for it. This had led to the boy getting prideful, to the point that the young child had started to develop a superiority complex. Izuku's treatment, on the other hand, had only begun to spiral downward with each week after his 4th birthday passed, and he failed to awaken his quirk. The teachers had started to ignore him and he had become the favorite test subject, victim, of Katsuki's increasingly violent personality and actions, the rest of their classmates slowly starting to follow his lead. For the record, Izuku would like to let it be known that being hit by a nitroglycerin-based explosion, even one that had even less strength than a firecracker in strength, hurt. "Du!" Kaken yelled from behind him. "Get your butt back here." Peeking over his shoulder, Izuku paled as he saw Kaken with his 2 cronies Tsubasa Hai, who possessed the Devil Wing quirk, and Yubasaki Nori, who possessed the quirk Finger Whips. The 3 of them possessed the strongest quirks at Dantuin Preschool, with Katsuki as their unquestioned leader. Squeaking as he skidded to a halt at the boundary wall of the playground, Izuku gulped and turned around to face the 3 bullies bearing down on him. Even though the last 6 months had featured Kaken as a tormentor, Izuku still regarded him as a friend, so it was very hard to see him and apply the word bully to him. Feeling his heart start to beat faster as the 3 boys approached him, the green-haired boy forced himself to breath in a regular pattern to slow it down. For whatever reason, it always helped calm him down to do that. Something felt different though, as if his breaths were carrying something more this time, something warm and energizing. Finally out of places to run, Deku? Bakugo sneered. I need to keep testing my quirk so it can get as strong as possible, so stay fing still. Quirkless loser. Tsubasa sneered. The boy was slightly overweight, but the 2 wings of his mutation quirk let him keep aloft with ease regardless. Frustration bubbled up within Izuku as he tensed himself, waiting for his old friend to start the inevitable beating. He was resigned to this going on, again, with no interference from the staff. They valued someone with a possible hero-level quirk far more than someone who was almost certainly quirkless. Even if it isn't fair, complaining to people who won't even listen won't change a thing. I need to accept that and move on. Izuku wrenched himself away from his spiraling train of thought with a mental sigh. Even if he couldn't do anything to fight back, he could at least stand firm and take his beating with dignity. Focusing on his breathing, he envisioned all the anger, sadness, frustration, and other negative motions flowing out with his next breath. With a mental click, Izuku's mind and body fell into the harmony that was needed for his power to activate. With Bakugo, does he raise one hand to attack his former friend and current punching bag? Bakugo Katsuki froze as Izuku closed his eyes, let out a long, drawn-out breath before his body exploded with a golden-yellow light from the tips of his puffy green hair to the soles of his favorite red sneakers. B-Bakugo.is that? Fat Wings asked in disbelief. A quirk. Finger features finished shakily. No fucking way, literally 1 day before the absolute limit that he could gain a quirk, and the little sheet actually awoke one. The blonde boy thought in a mixture of fury and disbelief. All the adults said that Deku was nothing, a quirkless nobody that wasn't worth the trouble of defending. Someone who Katsuki could use to get stronger without consequence. Shitty Deku, you're supposed to be nothing more than a pebble. Katsuki's shock quickly dissolved as fury mounted into rage as he watched Deku openly defy the fate he and the others had set for him. Deku's eyes cracked open after a moment, looking nervously around, before they suddenly shot open as he noticed the shimmering golden aura that was dancing across his body. His eyes started darting across his body, taking in every inch of his body that he could, an impossibly wide and happy smile slowly spreading across his face as if he was just realizing what was happening. Katsuki felt his rage reach its peak when he saw that stupid smile. His fury at its crescendo, and forcefully burying the slight shame and fear he felt, and exploded as he roared out, charging toward the green-haired dweeb. He would show that worthless Deku that, quirkless or not, he was always going to be a little FNG pebble before him. Instead, Deku looked up, smile faltering as a panicked look entered his eyes, and threw a sloppy punch at Katsuki, coincidentally intersecting the other boy's right-handed blow. As soon as the other boy's hand came within range, Katsuki let off as large an explosion as he thought he could get away with, the light illuminating Katsuki's face sinisterly. Just before the explosion reached Deku's arm though, the golden light around the shitty F seemed to glow brighter and wrap protectively around his arm, letting it pass through the explosion almost without any damage. More than that, Deku's fist bypassed his wide swing and slammed straight into Katsuki's nose. When he looked it up later, the closest that Katsuki could find to that type of move in any martial arts was referred to as a cross-counter, a particularly devastating move from boxing. Falling back a couple of steps with a yell of pain, the explosion quirk user covered his nose and glared at an apparently frozen and wide-eyed Izuku, who was staring at his undamaged arm in awe. Deku! Katsuki growled in a rising fury. In a fortunate turn of events for Izuku, one of the staff had witnessed the confrontation, and now that it was between 2 boys with active quirks rather than a quirk user and a quirkless boy, he quickly intervened and got the 2 separated. While he had their parents called. Later. Principal's office, Dantuan preschool. What did my brat do now? Bakugo Mitsuki asked in a resigned tone of voice. She was a pretty woman and it was clear that her son had taken after her, the 2 sharing several facial features along with their spiky, blonde hair and sharp red eyes. She alternated between glaring at her mulish son and looking quizzically at Izuku, who looked both amazed and guilty. And what does it have to do with my Izuku? Midoriya Izuku asked as she cuddled her boy. Tall and slim overall, albeit with a small bit of pudge gained recently from stress eating and worry for her son, it was clear that, just like the Bakugos, son had taken after mother in this case with their soft features, bright green eyes and dark green hair. The principal of the preschool, an overweight man with a weak mutation-type quirk called Imptail, was at a bit of a loss for words. He wasn't exactly prepared to say to the women, "Oh, a bullying victim we were content to ignore," as the bully was a powerful quirk holder, suddenly awoke to his quirk and fought back. He didn't want to lose his job. Unfortunately for him, the vice principal was slightly more moral and unafraid of retribution and explained the entire sorry story to the two mothers as his boss sat frozen with indecision. The look of righteous maternal fury rose in Inko, just as anger and disappointment in her son rose in Mitsuki. "Brat!" the blonde mother shouted. "What the living hell were you thinking?" "Inko, I am so sorry, I had no clue this brat was hurting Zuku." "You aren't to blame, Mitsu." Inko's voice trembled with anger. "This school, however, I am withdrawing my son from here as of now. How dare you treat my boy like this? You are clearly too incompetent to be trusted to prevent this from happening again. I'm withdrawing Katsuki as well." Mitsuki decided to twist the knife in the paling principal's side. "Clearly, you people don't know how to prevent an ego trip from going out of control. As for you, little brat, you are going to have therapy sessions until you learn how to be a decent human being. Having a strong quirk does not give you the right to treat anyone like you did to Izuku, even less so considering he's supposed to be your friend." Katsuki would have shouted back indignantly, but the death glare his mother was sending at him made him shut up. He was slowly beginning to realize that he had really pushed things too far, and one of the few people whose reactions he honestly feared was mad at him. The immediate future was not looking pleasant for the young bomber. As the two women gathered up their charges and left the office, the principal slumped in his seat, his soul practically fleeing his body. If the mother of the formerly quirkless boy decided to press charges against his school, he was doomed. His career would be ruined. He was so swept up in his misery that he neglected to realize that he was the architect of his own downfall in his willful neglect of the treatment Izuku had been receiving. Later. With Inko, living room, Midoriya family apartment. Midoriya Izuku was usually a placid, gentle and kind woman, but even she had buttons that one simply didn't press without unleashing fury. They all, for one reason or another, revolved around her precious son, her baby boy. She still couldn't believe that Katsuki would treat Izuku like he had. Even although she knew how those without quirks were seen, she'd have thought that the friendship that the two boys shared would have prevented it. She had been so wrong, and Izuku has suffered because of that. More so than her anger towards Katsuki, he was just a boy and didn't know any better. Her sheer fury towards the preschool and its staff was at heights that Inko never thought she could reach. Willful neglect of Izuku and encouraging Katsuki toward the path of bullying by refusing to do anything to stop or correct his behavior, that these were bad enough. But what that neglect implied about how the staff treated other kids who were quirkless or even had weak quirks was a red light to Inko. She would report them as soon as she assured of her own child's safety, and she had a feeling that Mitsuki would help her with it. Smiling at the thought of her old friend, Inko sighed. She and Mitsuki had been friends since middle school and had been each other's maid of honor at their respective weddings. Introducing their children had seemed like a good idea at the time, but it seemed that until Katsuki got his head deflated from all of the shallow praise that his quirk had gotten him, he couldn't be trusted to be near Izuku. Mitsuki had told her in a phone call earlier that she had, against Katsuki's protests, signed him up for therapy specifically aimed toward preventing and correcting bullying behavior in young children. She had also decided to send him to a preschool on the far side of Mizudafu called Terisu. Having eliminated Dantuin and Terisu from her options as well as others for their expense and distance, Inko was currently considering her options for where to send Izuku once she had finished filing the withdrawal paperwork. One was another local preschool called Corisanto, another was called Tatuin, while the last was called Koreiria. The second one was out, as it was run by the same type of staff as Dantuin, as evidenced by the similar names. Corisanto was slightly out of her price range at her current income level, So the only realistic choice was Korea Preschool. She had also done research into the elementary schools and had chosen one separate to the one Mitsuki would send Katsuki. A few years apart would, hopefully, be enough time for Katsuki to stop being an arrogant little. Huffing, Inko cut her thought off there. Katsuki was just a boy and now his mother was aware of the problem. She'd straighten him out, she knew. Mitsuki was not someone to take the kind of attitude Katsuki was showing. Mummy? Izuku's timid voice came from the door to the hall. In an instant, Inko was shaken from her thoughts and focused on her son. Come here, Izuku, she said kindly. In a flash, her boy was cuddling into her on her seat. Inko may have issues with his father, Hisashi, having taken a posting in America and basically sending money home and nothing more, but she was always grateful that he had, if nothing else, given her a son as bright and kind as Izuku. Izuku, why didn't you tell me things were so bad? She asked softly as she hugged him protectively. I didn't want to worry you. Izuku mumbled. And I didn't want Kaken to get into trouble. Oh my boy. Inko said tearfully. What a failure of a mother she was, to have her 4-year-old son trying to protect her. Listen here now. What Katsuki was doing to you was wrong, plain and simple. He has to learn that you can't treat people like that without repercussions. If he doesn't, one day he'll make someone mad who he can't just shrug off. He may even get hurt. It's not just for your sake, but his as well, that Mitsuki is being so harsh on him. Do you understand? But until today I was just what Kaken said, that a useless Deku, the boy said tearfully. You are my brave, kind and heroic boy, Izuku. Inko told him fiercely. You are not now, have never been, nor will you ever be useless. Get that thought out of your head right this instant. You have a quirk now, and no one, not Katsuki, not the staff at preschool nor anyone else can ever take that away from you. Still looking a bit apprehensive, but buoyed somewhat by her words, Izuku nodded shyly. Wanna see my quirk? Inko nodded eagerly. She was curious as to what kind of quirk had allowed her baby to match a powerful quirk-like explosion. Moving away and standing in front of his mother, Izuku started to breathe rhythmically, trying to bring back the same feeling and breathing that seemed to have activated his quirk earlier. Slowly, he was covered in the same shining golden aura as before. Izuku. Inko was in awe at her son's quirk. While it wasn't her gravity-based attraction of small objects or her husband's flame breath, she was still proud that he had a quirk that he could use to fulfill his dreams of becoming a hero. Not only that, but the shimmering golden aura was simply gorgeous to look at. What can you do so far? The golden stuff protected me from Kaken's explosion. Mostly. Izuku said with a gulp. I think I also hit harder than normal, 'cause it sounded like I really hurt Kaken when I punched him. And I had a small burn on my arm after, but it's all healed now, look. Inko automatically took her son's right arm in hand to examine it, but then the golden light shimmering and flowing over Izuku's body seemed to rush into her in response, making her feel like she'd just inhaled a hurricane-force wind. She let go automatically, with the feeling of wind rushing through her fading after a moment, but strangely, she felt better than she had in a few months. All of the aches and pains that she'd been ignoring from her part-time job were gone, and she felt completely refreshed, as if she'd had a good night's sleep. Mummy, are you okay? Izuku asked anxiously, his golden aura fading away with his sudden panic. I feel great, Inko declared with a little laugh. Izuku, your quirk just took away my aches and pains as if I'd just gotten a nice massage. I think your quirk just healed me somehow. The odd look in his eyes made Inko pick him up and cuddle him again. She decided that she needed to make an appointment with a quirk counselor for Izuku soon. A quirk that protects, enhances and heals the user isn't very common and wouldn't be without its drawbacks, so finding out what they were as soon as possible would be a very good idea. We're having katsudon for dinner to celebrate, Izuku, she informed her delighted son. Awesome! Izuku cheered, eyes shining again. 2 days later. Quirk counselor's office. Your son's quirk is most unusual, Midoriya-san. The doctor who had just tested Izuku's quirk said to a listening Inko. Unusual? How so? The greenette woman asked. Well, to start, my initial hypothesis was that it could possibly be an internal mutation-type quirk that altered his lungs to transform the oxygen he inhaled into an energy field of some kind. However, I've had several X-rays and scans taken using both machinery and quirks to get a look at his lungs and the rest of his respiratory system, and there are no noticeable divergences from the quirkless norm outside the fact that his lungs seems a tad larger and his diaphragm better developed than a child his age should have. The man explained. With that theory disproven, I've looked into other options and I've made quite a bit of progress. Rather than a mutation or even a transformation quirk related to oxygen, your son's quirk seems to be a pure emitter type that uses rhythmic breathing as a medium to draw out or generate that golden energy from his body. The energy field produced, as you suggested when you brought him in, seems to act as a protective barrier and enhances both his physical abilities and healing rate. In addition, the healing component at least seems to be able to be used on others. He healed a nurse of a bad headache when she accidentally brushed against him during one of our tests. That's amazing. Inko murmured, pride for her son in her voice. Yes, it's an impressive quirk to say the least. We've analyzed the energy signature and the results we're getting back are quite unique. Given time, we'll run comparison with other energy signatures we have on record to see if we can find any more similar cases to compare with. There's also one more unusual effect I think you should be aware of. Pulling a tablet off his desk, the doctor opened a video and showed it to Inko. On it, Izuku was standing in the center of a pool of ankle-deep water in his swim trunks, his golden aura flowing. Around him, what was unusual was that the water was rippling out from around him like he was the epicenter of an earthquake even as he stood still. As the video ended and the doctor took back the tablet, he continued. Judging from that particular test, there's some sort of invisible output to the aura he generates. So far none of our scanners have picked up any form of detectable output and it doesn't seem to have any effect on living or non-living matter outside of liquids. I'm starting to suspect that these ripples are nothing more than a visible sign of the aura's presence, similar to a human heartbeat, and that liquids are simply a superior conductor for the aura's energy. Looking up at her, the doctor smiled slightly. When we informed young Izuku of this, he decided on his quirk's name there and then. Since the name wasn't taken, we felt there was little issue with applying it to his quirk registry. He is now the user of the Hamon quirk. Hamon.as in Ripple? That sounds like a name Izuku would come up with. Inko smiled fondly. Her baby boy was a bit too clever for his own good sometimes. Yes, he picked a very good name. It states an effect of the quirk without disclosing what it actually does. The doctor nodded. Now, in regards to making the best use of his quirk, I would recommend that he learn martial arts of some kind. The DSPN will likely help him control his quirk and its physical effects. Additionally, he is currently required to remain stationary in order to perform the breathing exercises needed to create the golden energy that he utilizes. The longer he maintains that exercise, the more energy his body produces and stores, and the longer he can maintain his aura. Some martial arts, such as ancient versions of karate and the combat version Tai Chi, possess some manner of breathing techniques that he may be able to adapt for his use. The added close combat capabilities will also be useful should he walk down the path of a hero. Yes, he will. Inko said tearfully. It's all he's ever wanted to be. Oh dear, pardon me for crying. It's fine, Midoriya-sen. The doctor reassured her. Finding out that your child's quirk is powerful and they'll use it to fulfill their dreams is a tear-inducing feeling. Here, have a tissue. When the nurse escorted Izuku back into the room after getting cleaned up from the tests, he immediately went to his mother and started talking 16 to the dozen about all the things he was going to try with his quirk. Inko listened indulgently and offered up a final silent prayer of thanks to whatever or whoever had granted her wish. Her boy had a quirk and was going to become a hero. And she would support him the entire way. The next week, therapist's office, Mizudefu. Well, Bakugo-san, I've finished your son's initial prognosis and I've got some good news and bad news, the therapist stated calmly. He was a bald man, whose own quirk had guided him to his current career. Empathic perception allowed him to perceive the emotional state of anyone within a certain range who he could see clearly, viewing them in a similar way that others perceive color. Just give it to me straight, sensei. Bakugo, Mitsuki said, bracing herself. Sitting in the seat beside her, Katsuki was scowling and pouting at having to go through this bullshit. I am afraid that your son has a classic, albeit severe, case of an inferiority-superiority complex, the therapist said bluntly. Children, particularly those as young as yours, are easily influenced by their surroundings. The constant praise and accolades he received from both his teachers and peers for his powerful quirk have led to him developing a rather swollen opinion of himself. The fact that the teachers and authority figures in his life outside yourself have never sought to interfere with his actions or provide any negative reinforcement for his more volatile behavior only reinforced this opinion and helped set in a belief that it was his right. Mitsuki glared down at her son for a moment before taking a deep breath and returning her attention back to the doctor. Go on, she said tightly. The psychologist merely nodded, looking down at the notes. The other half of the issue, the inferiority complex, is a bit trickier and harder to root out and is deeply rooted in his relationship with one of his classmates you mentioned earlier, a Midoriya Izuku. The best I could find was something that occurred shortly after his quirk emerged and his superiority complex started to develop. A common syndrome in superiority complexes is a refusal to accept aid and to even see any attempts to offer it as an insult. A few months ago, Katsuki-kun suffered a fall while adventuring through the park. While the other children simply stood back and watched, Midoriya-kun quickly moved to help him up. For Katsuki-kun's burgeoning superiority complex, instead of an offer to help, this was perceived as an insult and even as Midoriya mocking him. So all this started over something so? Brat. Mitsuki growled at her son. You are one sorry little sheet, you know that? Screw you, hag. Katsuki shot back immediately. Settle down please, both of you, the therapist stated sternly, causing both blondes to quiet down. As I was saying, Katsuki-kun's emotions regarding Midoriya-kun's are quite tangled, mixing anger, respect, admiration, rage, and a host of other emotions that I can only begin to make a guess at understanding. The end result, however, is that Midoriya-kun became something of an avatar for Katsuki-kun's doubts and insecurities about himself, resulting in his harsh treatment regarding the boy in an attempt to expunge them. The doctor then offered a kind smile to Mitsuki. Luckily, Katsuki-kun is still young enough that his superiority complex should still be relatively easy to treat, and once we get to the root of the matter, his inferiority complex should likewise be easily treated. However, I can only do so much in my office, and in cases like these it is far too easy for the patient to backslide without regular reinforcement. I would advise you to speak to Katsuki's new teachers and make them aware that they need to be particularly diligent in keeping an eye on Katsuki-kun's behavior and the need to be strict with their punishments if he acts out. I would also advise for you to randomly check to make certain they are not enabling him rather than following your wishes. Oh, you can be certain of that, Mitsuki said coldly. I will be making sure that this brat toes the line, or else I'll be sending him to the strictest school I can find to instill some discipline into him. Katsuki had a horrible sense of foreboding about that. As the mother and son duo prepared to leave, the therapist spoke to Katsuki directly, his voice kind but very firm. Katsuki, you are angry at me and everyone. You don't see why we're getting on your back about this, correct? So, the explosion user growled out through grit teeth. You must understand this, if nothing else, acting as you have will only harm your dream of becoming a hero. The man sat back in his chair and regarded the truculent boy. Slightly stricter regulations are being hashed together in the Diet regarding who is permitted to gain a hero license or even enter a hero course at some of the more prestigious schools. Hero course applicants will have their histories and backgrounds more thoroughly examined, and those with a history of negative behavior and bullying, as you have shown, will have a much harder time gaining acceptance. That hit Katsuki like a sledgehammer. He couldn't even start to believe or understand how his actions would hurt his chances of accomplishing his dreams. His eyes went wide and he started to clench his hands, a part of him wanting nothing more than to let his quirk go off to vent his frustrations, but he forced the urge down. The old hag had been cracking down on him even more than usual for using his quirk recklessly ever since he'd been transferred out of Dantuan. You see, Katsuki, your quirk is indeed strong, and I can see how it could be a great tool to combat villains, the man continued gravely. But at the moment, villains are not the enemy you need to face, not the hurdle you need to overcome. For now, you must learn to conquer yourself instead. The dandelion-haired boy looked at the older man in confusion. Your aggression and attitude are now the biggest roadblocks on your quest to be a hero. The man tried to explain in terms the boy could understood. Every single report about you from Dan to in preschool is about your quirk and your abilities and future. Not a single word is mentioned about you as a person. The reason behind that is sadly simple. Your behavior does not reflect that of a hero. So long as this remains the case, even if you become a hero, you will never reach the top 10, never mind the number 1 position. Katsuki was struck dumb by that statement. He mechanically followed his mother out of the room, his mind churning in thought about everything he had been told, with all of it clashing with his own self-image and pride. Monday the next week. Principal's office, Kore-ria Kindergarten. I see. The principal of the Kore-ria Kindergarten, Sakura Nakari, nodded seriously. She was an old woman, approaching retirement age, but she was still fit as a fiddle. More importantly to the worried mother sitting opposite of her, she was a firm proponent of equal rights who didn't give a damn about what quirks people had, just that they sat down and didn't kick up a fuss. I've heard a few bad rumors about Dan in preschool and their principal in particular, but for them to go this far, it beggars belief. I wasn't exactly happy to hear of it myself, Inko said as she cuddled her son to her side. The sheer nerve of them, treating my baby boy like that. Trust me, Midoriya-san, I'm a mother and a grandmother myself. Were I in your shoes, my reactions would mirror your own. The principal nodded sympathetically. It was a sad state in her opinion when educators, particularly those of young children, were more interested in pandering to a select few in hopes of small sliver of recognition later on rather than properly guiding their young charges. I can assure you that in my kindergarten it doesn't matter if you're the next Endeavor or All Might or even Quirkless, all kids are treated under the same ethos, firm but fair. I have a zero-tolerance policy for quirkism in particular and bullying in general. Quirkism, or the quirk supremacist belief, was something which had reared its head several times over the past 2.5 centuries since the quirk factor had begun to manifest itself. Those who believed in it advocated the right for any quirk user to freely use their quirk as they please. Those who followed these tenets were heavily discriminatory against those with weak quirks, though the definition of weak varied among branches, and the quirkless in particular, citing them as crippled at best and a genetic throwback and aberration at worst. Then there were the host of other quirk-based bigotries that were bandied about alongside the quirkist slogan: anti-mutation bigotry, pro-emitter favoritism, villainous heroic quirk discrimination. Despite how far humanity had come in other areas since the rise of the quirk era, bigotry was still alive and well, even if it wore a new face. It was a thought that often saddened the old woman when she thought about it. That is very good to hear, Sakuran-san, Inko said firmly. I sincerely hope that my boy doesn't come home with bruises and the like, at least not without some form of explanation from you. Rest assured, any form of harm to a student is looked into extensively. While we understand that children can be a bit rough at times, that is no excuse to be lax in our duties. Sakuran assured her. One of the teachers has a quirk called replay vision, which allows her to look into the past of anyone she's touching. It only goes back about 10 minutes, but that's more than enough for most instances of suspected bullying or harassment. Letting out a breath of relief, Inko nodded. Thank you. I'll leave my boy with his teacher. Who is? That would be Mitsuhide Rina-sensei, the principal supplied with a small smile. She's very good with children who have had a hard time with bullies. You'd be surprised how many parents come here after finding out their children have been bullied. Minutes later. Classroom, Kore-ria Kindergarten. All right everyone, I'm here to introduce a new friend to you all today, the teacher said with a smile. Mitsuhide Rina was a pretty young woman in her 20s, with red eyes and blue hair. Her quirk was a mutation type called Four Arms and literally gave her an extra set of arms coming out of her shoulders. She had one set folded away behind her back and her right main arm on Izuku's shoulder. This is Midoriya Izuku-kun. He's transferred in today due to problems at his previous school. Try to get along with him, okay? Introduce yourself, Izuku-kun. Midoriya Izuku, the little green-haired boy bowed quickly. And nice to meet you all? A chorus of greetings came back at him, the faces of his new classmates curious about him. Now, I'm going to go over the rules of the class for everyone, both to introduce Izuku-kun to them, and to remind all of you of them as well. Rina said, addressing the class as a whole. First, there is to be no quirk usage in the classroom at all. That is to be restricted to the playground. Second, in the case that you do use your quirk in the playground, it is to be a demonstration only. You are not to direct your quirk towards another student, nor are you to use them on the school buildings or equipment. For those of you with mutation quirks such as mine, while using any extra limbs or whatnot is allowed, anything else falls under the same rules and you have to use them carefully so as not to hurt anyone. As for punishments, accidentally using your quirk to harm another student or a teacher will result in your parents being called and you will be put in the timeout corner for the day. Deliberately using your quirk to harm someone else, staff or student, will result in a week's suspension and a meeting between your parents and school staff to determine your future at this school going forward. We give second chances, but never third ones. Izuku was looking up at the teacher with more than a little awe. The old sensei never said anything about that kind of stuff before. And of course, it goes without saying that words are a big part of bullying as well. The teacher eyed her students carefully. Any insults toward one of your classmates, whether it's because of their quirk, lack of one, appearance, or anything else, will see you spending the rest of the day in the timeout corner. Does everyone understand me? Yes, sensei. Class sang at her. Good. Now let's get started, shall we? Rina clapped her primary hands together. Izuku, go and sit next to Jiro-chan there. The kid in question was a purple-haired girl wearing a striped dress. She also had a pair of dangling things coming from her ears, and they were literally a part of her earlobes. She had a bored expression on her face, but still nodded to him with a small smile that disappeared quickly as she turned her attention back to the lesson. Izuku paid attention too, but he kept fidgeting and looking around nervously. He wasn't used to everyone that well, not trying to sneer, jeer, or otherwise look at him like he was something nasty they had just trodden on. It was, to not put too fine a point on it, freaking him out a bit. It got to the point that at lunch, Rina held him back to talk to him. Once she got a good understanding of why he had been twitching and looking nervous as if he'd had ants in his pants, she'd offered the boy a gentle smile, while silently vowing to do everything in her power to have the quirkest assholes responsible for his previous treatment blacklisted, and promised that he had nothing to be afraid of. She honestly hoped the boy got acclimated to his new environment quickly. No 4-year-old should be such a nervous, twitchy little thing. In the playground, Izuku walked along the playground before settling himself in small hidden corner away from the other students. He'd become good at finding out-of-the-way places to avoid the other kids over the past 6 months. It had worked out well, most of the time, unless Kaken was intent on practicing his quirk. Kaken was really smart and hard to hide from, so nowhere was safe from him when he was in a mood. He knew that the sensei said that he didn't have to hide anymore. The sensei had been really nice and promised no one would pick on him again. But some habits were hard to break. And honestly, he was still feeling so itchy and twitchy from class that he really didn't want to deal with so many other people right now. Yo! A slightly flat voice suddenly pulled him out of his thoughts, making Izuku yelp in shock and look up. It was that girl he'd sat next to in class, Jiro-san, wasn't it? Whatcha doing way over here? She asked curiously. Ora J, just what I do at lunch. Izuku stuttered out. I was kinda bullied at my old school, so going somewhere to hide at lunch is kinda a habit. Oh, that Esikus. The purplet frowned. I got picked on too because of my quirk making me look weird. That was before my parents transferred me here. Your quirk? The dangly things on your ears? The boy asked curiously, his stutter falling away as he focused on his favorite subject. But my quirk's called earphone jack. Jiro offered, both cord-like extensions lifting slightly without her touching them. It's a pretty cool mutation quirk that lets me use these jacks to listen in on things. I think the quirk doc said they could also act as amplifiers to send my heartbeat into things. That's awesome. Why would anyone bully you for that? Izuku asked in disbelief. Your quirk's so cool. I didn't tell anyone what it did, and they all assumed it was a weak one. The girl looked unimpressed by her former classmates' idiocy. I coulda just ignored them, but my mum found out and transferred me out to here about 4 months ago. My mum says kids are cruel. Izuku frowned. That's what my dad said too. Jiro nodded. What about you? What's your quirk? Mine's an emitter type called Hamon, the boy said happily. He really loved his quirk. Watch. Stilling in his body in a way that was becoming easier and easier, Izuku began to slow his breathing into the now familiar rhythmic pattern. Izuku was once again covered in the golden energy of his quirk, with Jiro looking on in slight awe. That looks so wicked, she laughed out. What does it do? It acts like a shield protecting my body. It also makes me stronger, faster, and heals me if I'm hurt. Izuku answered happily, stopping his breathing and allowing the small amount of energy he'd gathered to dissipate, causing the aura to quickly fade. It can even heal other people too, but I dunno how that works yet. Dude, that's an awesome quirk. Jiro's eyes were wide at that. Those were just the basic uses of his quirk. She knew enough about quirks to know if one had diverse basic abilities, there were often uses, abilities, and subtle nuances of the quirk that would only be discovered through time and experimentation. Her own was a good example, as was Izuku's. The green-haired boy chuckled nervously and scratched the back of his head shyly. Y-it is pretty cool. The quirk counselor told my mum that I should learn martial arts, because my quirk only activates and starts generating energy if I breathe in a special way. She's looking into local dojos for me. Jiro blinked. So you want to be a hero? Just like All Might. Izuku confirmed eagerly. His eyes were practically glowing with determination and excited that was more almost as bright as the light of his quirk. What about you? I want to be a hero, yeah. The purplet said with a nod before the chime signaling the end of lunch rang. We'd better get back. Rina-sensei gets ticked off if the class isn't back by the second chime. Nodding, Izuku followed the girl back to the classroom, feeling warm inside. He had, for the first time in over 6 months, maybe possibly made a friend. On top of not being bullied and or ignored by the majority of the class, that made today the best day of kindergarten preschool he'd ever had. He could get used to this. After school. Kitchen, Midoriya home. Inko smiled as Izuku chatted with her about the new friend he had made today, a girl called Jiro Kyoka. It warmed her heart to see him already making friends on the first day of his new school. It added a lot of justification to her decision to send him to Kore-ria Kindergarten rather than any of the other preschools and kindergartens in the area, even if it was a tad more expensive than Dantuan had been. The older Midoriya repressed a frown as she recalled the phone call with Hisashi last week about the need for him to send more money over from his paycheck. She knew how much money he made, and she also knew how much he sent to her per month, and there was a very noticeable gap between the two figures, especially considering his company paid for room and board while he was working overseas in America. She had, after an hour-long phone call, managed to persuade him to up the amount by a sizable amount, but it had left a sour taste in her mouth afterwards. Hayashi hadn't had any kind of say in the matter about the money. It was legally required that a child get the best support and resources to learn how to use their quirk safely, and it wasn't as if Izuku had a quirk that fired nuclear fallout energy every time he sneezed. It was, in fact, a fairly simple quirk to train and use. Unless Izuku was going to hit someone, it seemed that the energy it generated was content to simply protect his body, enhance his muscles, and heal him, so the amount of extra money needed for the new school and for membership at a dojo was more than reasonable. Hayashi was just being in but for the sake of being in but. She sometimes wondered why she'd married the man in the first place, but her precious baby always kept her from regretting it. Izuku, I've been looking around for a good place to have you learn martial arts, as the court counselor advised me to, she said to her baby boy after dinner. And I think I've found one that is suitable for you. Really? Izuku squeaked adorably, eyes shining. Yes, we'll go and see if they'll be willing to take you on this weekend, the older Midoriya said as she ruffled her son's hair fondly. By all accounts, this should be a good place to train in using your quirk, but I want you to promise me that you'll be careful and tell me if anything happens, okay? I promise, Mummy. Izuku promised immediately, making Inko squeal inside at how earnest and adorable her son was. By the time he was in high school, she was certain that he'd be fending the girls off with a stick. Grandchildren were something that Inko was so looking forward to. Off you go and wash your hands and face, and I'll set the computer up so you can watch your favorite video, she told Izuku fondly. Her son squeaked an affirmative and tore out of the room to go as she asked, leaving her to shake her head in amusement. She swore that Izuku had added over 1 million views to that first video of All Might's heroics just by himself. Saturday. Office, Enryu Dojo. So this is the kid? A large man peered down at Izuku. He was heavily muscled, mostly due to his quirk bulk up. It was a passive one that greatly increased the speed that his muscles healed from damage and fatigue while also accelerating muscle growth without impairing his muscles' flexibility. He was Bushi Masuo, the main owner of this dojo. With his buzz-cut and squashed nose, the man made for quite the intimidating sight. Why yes, Inko said, somewhat intimidated by the man, who was about half again her height, even sitting down as he was, and at least thrice her mass in pure muscle. Hi. Izuku squeaked as he looked up, and up, at the giant of a man. So I got the docs from the counselor about your boy here, he said without further ado. Afraid I can't do much for the kid myself, since my specialty is in karate, but it looks like he'd be a good fit for my wife. She specializes in Tai Chi and is an expert in both the combat and meditative aspects. Given his quirk's reliance on breathing and the effects it can cause, she basically told me to take a hike and let her teach him. That's very nice of her, Inko said with a nod. Now, just so you know, basic training is mostly focused around meditation, physical exercise, stretches, and some basic kata. Not as exciting as actually learning to kick butt, but you gotta learn to walk before you can start to run. Masuo offered Izuku with a kind smile. That includes quirk usage. You'll need to learn the basics without using your quirk before you can start trying to use them in combination. Follow me so far, kid. My quirk kinda sorta activates all on its own whenever I breath rhythmically. Izuku offered with a slight frown. Is that a problem? Raising an eyebrow, the dojo master shook his head slightly. Nah, quirks activating involuntarily or in response to some specific action are actually pretty common, particularly when you're still young and learning control. Still, it's a bit of a surprise that something as simple as breathing in a certain way would activate it. Could be a mental trigger or something that registers a change in breathing. The man trailed off in thought for a moment before shaking his head as he heard footsteps approaching his office. Anyway, my wife will be able to get a better read on it than me, and that's probably her now. The door opened and a petite woman walked in. She was only a couple of inches taller than Inko, but was svelte and lithe, with a long ponytail of lustrous black hair running down her back and bobbing just above her ankles. She was dressed in a Chinese-style Tongzhuang jacket, kung fu pants and shoes. She had an open, friendly face and a button nose. The only intimidating thing about her was the lack of mascara in her eyes, leaving them covered in her emerald green irises. Kanzashi, here's the boy you were eager to see. Bushi Masuo greeted his wife and business partner with a broad grin, gesturing at Izuku. So I can see, dear. Bushi Kanzashi smiled in amusement at her husband before turning to look at Izuku. So you're Izuku-kun? I hear tell that you have a pretty cool quirk. Izuku blushed and fidgeted in place, still unused to the fact that he had a quirk and that it was indeed pretty cool. Kanzashi suppressed a giggle. At how cute the boy was. Now don't be modest, she chided him instead. While getting a big head is a bad thing for anybody, one should always acknowledge their own strengths as well, otherwise you'll never get stronger. A quirk user, or any warrior in Bushi Kanzashi's mind, had to constantly walk a fine line between ego and modesty. Too much ego and not enough modesty led to false pride, hubris and arrogance, while too much modesty and not enough ego led to a lack of confidence and self-doubts that would only hinder their growth. A true warrior had to balance both, confident enough to know their own strength, but humble enough to admit their weaknesses and still be willing to grow. It was a delicate balance, but one an aspiring hero, which the counselor had mentioned Izuku aspired to be, would need to find if they wanted to be great. Why dash yet at my Quirk stop pretty cool? Izuku offered questioningly. Wanna see it? If it isn't going to destroy the office, sure. The female martial artist replied with a small smile and a nod. So Izuku let himself fall into the breathing pattern he'd been rapidly growing accustomed to, calmly breathing in and out in a controlled rhythm and causing his golden aura to once again flare to life. He was well aware of the two martial artists watching with rapt attention, but was able to force down his nervousness as he focused on his breathing. I can see why your quirk counselor thought that Tai Chi would be advantageous to your quirk. Kanzashi said after a moment. Breathing control is an important aspect in all forms of martial arts, both armed and unarmed, and it only gets more important as one advances, but Nigong and Qigong breathing exercises are a fundamental aspect of Tai Chi, regardless of whether you use the exercise version or the combat version. Once you've mastered those, I can see that your quirk will definitely be viable in combat. I will take you on as my student, Midoriya Izuku. Masu dear, please fill out the paperwork. Yes, honey. The big man beamed at his petite wife. Should I give them the discount? Definitely. I'm teaching because I want to, not to make money, the black-haired woman replied before turning to Inko and explaining, personal students are something I take seriously, but I rarely find anyone worth teaching. For those I do find worth it, I half their lesson fees as thanks. Oh, that's very good of you. Are you sure? Inko asked uncertainly. No worries, this place has enough students paying full fees to keep us in the black easily. Kanzashi waved a hand negligently. Now, we'd better find Izuku here a GI to wear it. Oh, you will have to pay for his GI, I am afraid. That's fine, I budgeted for that. The older Midoriya said with a nod before looking down at her son, who was still maintaining his quirk. Izuku, you can stop now. Go with Bushi-sensei and she'll find a GI for you while I handle the boring paperwork. Okay, mummy. Izuku nodded obediently and the golden glow faded as he let go of his rhythmic breathing. He followed Kanzashi out of the door. He's a good kid. Masuo said approvingly. He's my baby boy. Inko said with pride. He has a bad habit of keeping anything he thinks might worry me to himself though, so you may want to watch out for that. Like I said, he's a good kid. He obviously loves you to bits. Masuo grinned at her as he pulled out the registration form for his dojo. The wife and I haven't decided to have kids yet, but if and when we do, I hope our kid likes us as much as Izuku-kun there likes you. Quite flustered by the praise, like mother like son, Inko grabbed a pen and started filling out the forms. With Izuku. So, how does that fit? Kanzashi-sensei, as she insisted on him calling her, considering both she and her husband taught classes it prevented confusion, asked. Experimentally moving, Izuku nodded. It's comfy and loose, but it doesn't feel like it'll slip or get in the way. Good. Nice that we found one that fits on the second try. The woman nodded with a smile. Now, Izuku-kun, I read in the quirk counselor's notes that your quirk, Hamon, acts as a shield against blows, heals you if you're hurt and enhances your physical condition that is, makes you hit harder, using that golden energy. Is that about right? Hi, sensei. Izuku bobbed his head obediently. I think getting a baseline of what you can do with it. Kanzashi mused. Show me how you form a fist. Bemused by the sudden direction of the conversation, Izuku obeyed. Not bad for a beginner, you don't make the thumb under the fingers mistake that a lot of people make before being corrected or finding out painfully. She nodded approvingly. Right, follow me, Izuku-kun. Kanzashi-sensei led him to the dojo proper, which was empty at that moment. Izuku was curious about it, so he asked. That's because most of our lessons usually take place after school hours on the weekdays, she replied as she hunted about in a cupboard. Any lessons on the weekend take place in the afternoon or evening depending on the age of the student in question, which leaves us the mornings for paperwork and other things. Now, where did I? There you are. With a triumphant expression on her face, Kanzashi pulled out a human-shaped doll of some kind. It looked like a special order pillow filled with straw or something. She also pulled out a stand to hang it from. This is one of the things we use to let new students get a good idea of their punching power, she explained as she assembled the stand and set it on the floor. She then hung the doll from it where it stood, suspended. While she was doing this, Masuo and Inko had entered the room and were observing them. Okay, Izuku-kun. I want you to punch this dummy twice in the target area. Kanzashi directed him, indicating the bull's eye painted onto the dummy. Once with your regular strength and once with your quirk. That'll give me a good baseline of your physical abilities. Okay, sensei. Izuku nodded obediently. Drawing one tiny fist back, he threw it in a fairly good punch, for an untrained kid, at the center of the bullseye, making the dummy rock back slightly, but it was well within expected range for a 4.5-year-old. Not bad. Masuo nodded. A bit sloppy and uncoordinated, but you've got better control than most first-timers I've seen. Okay, good first try, Izuku-kun. Kanzashi said approvingly. Now use your quirk. Nodding, the green-haired boy started the rhythmic breathing that activated his quirk. Izuku was a very smart boy for his age, and he'd figured out an important aspect of his quirk. If he attacked as he breathed out, the resulting attack with his body and quirk would be that much stronger. Hi-ya! Izuku let out a breath as he slammed a strong punch into the dummy, the golden aura around his fist flaring brightly in response. As soon as the blow landed, the golden energy pulsed powerfully. Bang! In an instant, the dummy was ripped from its tethers and flew back into the wall, where it exploded into clumps of fabric and straw that scattered themselves all over the dojo floor. Masuo and Kanzashi blinked in stupefaction at this sight. While ripping the dummy off its tethers wasn't that uncommon for a kid with a modestly powerful strength-boosting quirk, most kids were at least twice his age before they could accomplish it. For a 4-year-old whose quirk had only been active for a month to be strong enough to cause it to explode like that was something neither had expected. Well now, Kanzashi said mildly, I do believe we have a good idea of how powerful your quirk can be, Izuku-kun. Was that the best strike you have? Hi. Izuku replied in shock. He was so embarrassed that he'd broken something on his very first day. Sorry about the D-dummy. Don't worry about it, kid, those things aren't exactly made to last. Masuo offered with a shrug. We go through at least one a week in our senior classes, they're made to take a beating and then bust. Part of learning control is learning how to hit them without breaking them. Don't worry, we don't charge people for their replacement either, it's part of the fee. The dojo masters stifled grins at how relieved Izuku looked at that news. He really was a good boy. Then they noticed a worried expression on Inko's face. Mrs. Midoriya, I can promise you that Izuku-kun is in good hands. Kanzashi said reassuringly to the worried mother. The Hamon quirk is powerful and it will definitely require great control to be used properly, but that is one thing that Tai Chi is quite good at teaching. I can promise you that, given time and training, Izuku will be able to strike a dummy like that with his quirk on without doing any serious damage. Inko relaxed at that and bowed slightly. Thank you. Please teach Izuku well. Bushi Kanzashi bowed in return. I will do so. 3 years later. Enryu Dojo, Mizudafu City. Midoriya Izuku, age 7.5, dodged a punch from his opponent before smoothly repositioning to launch an open palm strike at their solar plexus. As the other boy gasped and reeled from the blow, Izuku moved forward, kicking their feet out from under them before swiftly following downward to place a fist in front of their throat, indicating a solid strike there. Cease. Kanzashi-sensei declared. Point and match to Midoriya-kun. Damn it. The boy Izuku had just beaten grumbled as he regained his breath. Sorry, but you left yourself overextended after that last punch. You need to be careful about putting too much power behind a strike you're not sure will hit. Izuku offered helpfully as he extended a hand to help his opponent up. The other boy glowered up at him for a moment before sighing and accepting the aid. He had a basic emitter-type quirk that multiplied his strength so long as had one of his fists clenched, boosted knuckle, so he tended to go into fights trying to overwhelm his opponents with pure power rather than using technique or planning, a habit that both Masuo and Kanzashi were trying to break him of. Kanzashi looked on proudly at Izuku, particularly pleased with his use of minimum force to achieve victory over a more physically powerful opponent. Izuku might not be what most would consider a prodigy, but he was the type of student any true master would give an arm for. Diligent, hardworking, always willing to listen to advice and instruction and equally eager to improve, all while retaining an individual spark that pushed him to push forward on his own as much as he did under her guidance. Besides, just because he wasn't a prodigy didn't mean he wasn't talented. He was immensely quick study on nearly everything she tried to teach him, rarely needing to be corrected more than once or twice before he understood the full breadth of a lesson and began to internalize it. She was an accredited master of all 5 of the major ancestral styles of Tai Chi, but so far her training with Izuku had only been focused on the Chin style. He'd already shown a natural inclination for it, and she was certain that he'd prove equally as capable with the Yang and Wu styles as well. The Sun style was a bit more of a toss-up, but she was confident in her student's ability to at least learn something from it. Sadly, she was fairly certain the Wu Hao wouldn't quite fit with her student's personal style and growth, which was a bit of a shame, but no great loss. Izuku was aspiring to be a hero, not a martial arts master. That meant focusing his training on what would best suit his abilities. If his dreams changed as he grew, something she particularly doubted, there was fire in her student whenever he spoke about being a hero, then they could readjust his training plan accordingly. Inko had even signed up for basic lessons on purely exercise-based Tai Chi to both help the woman slim down from her comfort eating after the stress the poor woman had gone through. Since Izuku's 4th birthday, and to give both mother and son something to do to spend more time together. Kenzashi had grown quite fond of both the Midoriyas. Both were honestly good people with warm hearts and kind souls. "All right, everyone," she called out, clapping her hands to get the class's attention. This was one of the days where her and her husband's class mixed together to gain experience and an understanding of different styles. They occasionally even invited one of the other dojos nearby to participate, though it was much rarer. "That's the last match of the day. Go clean up and get changed for your folks picking you up." As the assorted boys and girls scattered off to the separate changing rooms, Kenzashi sighed in slight envy. Her quirk, body memory, allowed her body to perfectly and instantly memorize any physical motion that she made and keep it recorded for as long as she wished it. That had made learning the various kata, forms, and techniques of Tai Chi a very quick process indeed for her. By the time she had turned 18, she was already swiftly rising through the ranks of the martial arts. She'd never considered becoming a hero. She was at her core a baseline human with a superhuman memory. While she could quickly acquire the skill needed, she had always believed she'd lack the power to match the more dangerous powers out there. Skill could overcome much, but there was little even the best martial artist could do against someone who could turn into a 50-foot giant at will. Besides, she looked ridiculous in spandex. She'd faced her own trials though. Her ability to learn the forms with little effort had ended up making her arrogant in her younger years. Luckily her sensei had quickly and utterly beaten that out of her. In spite of her perfect memorization of style and technique, her body had lacked the speed and power needed to use those movements to the fullest extent, and she'd been utterly crushed. It had been a particularly painful wake-up call, and she'd sworn that it would be a lesson she'd never forget. It was also one she knew she'd need to pass on to her students as well. Izuku was one of the first out after getting changed, and Kenzashi had to smile at how cheerful and happy he was now. There were very few signs left of the skittish, bullied boy who'd first set foot into her dojo, replaced with a friendly and confident child that had earned his own sense of self-worth. He'd never be the most outgoing child, and he was still skittish around those with particularly volatile quirks. The latter was something they'd have to work on later, but she'd already decided that could wait for a few more years until she was sure the boy had regained his emotional stability. Pushing too hard, too fast with children was never a good thing. Sometimes you simply had to take it slow and guide them gently toward the end goal. "Midoriya-kun," she beckoned the boy over. "How's Inko-san doing after the divorce?" Izuku grimaced. "Slightly. She's not well, glad it's over really, sensei." Kenzashi withheld a wince. The divorce between Inko and her husband had been a rather turbulent one, to say the least. Hisashi had been stalwart in his refusal to even entertain the idea, more out of concern about how the insinuation that he couldn't balance his home and work lives would affect his career than any care for his wife or child. He'd also refused to damage his career by taking a position back in Japan and spending more time with his family, convinced he'd be able to advance his career far more quickly in the American offices. That refusal to bend or sacrifice anything involving his career for his family had been what had eventually made Inko snap and demand the divorce. It had taken 2 months of constant arguing between the two before cooler heads had stepped in on both sides, Hisashi's American bosses for him and Bakugo Masaru on Inko's side, and the two had been forced to come to an amicable agreement. In the end, they had split their assets down the middle, and Hisashi had agreed to make child support payments every couple of months. Thankfully, the man hadn't even tried to gain custody over Izuku, either out of a belief that raising a child on his own would take too much time away from his career, or his understanding that his wife would gladly murder him if he tried. Inko had just been relieved when it was over. Granted, she hadn't been happy in any way that her husband had ended up choosing his career over his wife and son. Indeed, it was something she was a bit bittersweet about. She'd fallen in love with Hisashi partly because of his dedication and focus, particularly when it came to his goals in life, but it was still a bitter pill to swallow when she realized that she and their son would always come secondary to those goals. Well, please let her know she's always welcome to stop by for tea if she ever needs someone to talk to, okay? Kanzashi said with a sigh. Hi, sensei. Izuku nodded, a slightly unhappy look on his face. Knowing that his father had chosen his job in America over his mother and him must have been a blow, even if Izuku himself barely had any memories of the man. He'd taken the transfer to America when Izuku was only a year old and had rarely ever come back to visit his home or family. So how have the latest batch of tests you've been trying with your Quick coming? The Tai Chi master asked, knowing just the subject to quickly get her student out of his sour mood. Immediately perking up, the green-haired boy smiled excitedly. Really great, sensei. I can channel Hamon through pretty much anything. It's a little weird, but liquids are still the best conductors that I've found. Oh, I've also been working on sending my energy outward through my feet like you suggested in addition to simply channeling it through my hands, and it's working really well. That's very good, Izuku. Kanzashi nodded approvingly. A lot of emitter quirks are easier to manipulate through the hands and arms, but very few think to do the same with their legs and feet. I'm sure you'll only improve in time, but eventually I want you to learn to focus your Hamon through any part of your body you could use to strike with, or even your entire body should it be needed. The important thing is to simply take this one step at a time, master your legs and feet first then move on. Yes, sensei, the boy nodded. Just then, Inko arrived and swept Izuku up into a hug that the boy returned eagerly, making Kanzashi smile softly. The two had the best relationship possible for a parent and child. They were best friends as well as a loving mother and son. Honestly, it made her the smallest bit jealous that maybe she should talk with Masuo later about starting a family of their own. After the students left, Kanzashi headed back to the office and decided to get an early start on their paperwork. It was an endless battle, partly because there were a number of people out there who wanted people to focus solely on a person's quirk and thus were trying to get rid of a lot of the pre-quirk martial arts and have them replace them with quirk-focused schools and training centers. Quirkism was sadly still an issue in their society, and while they rarely advanced far in the government, extremists still managed to weasel their way in and make life difficult for dojos like theirs that focused on the art rather than getting the most out of a student's quirk. Fortunately, she had learned more than a few tricks over the years to take care of that particular brand of annoying a-hole, so it was something she dealt with easily. Just as she finished with it and was thinking about whether she wanted to cook tonight or if they should simply get takeout, the phone on her desk started to ring. Sighing in exasperation, as this happened every time, the woman picked up the phone. Hello, Enryu Dojo, Master Bushi Kanzashi speaking, she said professionally. Yes, Dada, you want to enroll your child? About 7 years old? That's no problem. Yes, the GI is extra. I'm afraid that you own one already? That's good, so I take it she has some previous training? Oh, it's not a problem. My husband and I just like to evaluate the skills our future students have before we enroll them formally. Yes, Saturday's fine. Of course. See you then, ma'am. Hanging up, Kanzashi smiled. Well, now that I wonder what this new student will bring to the dojo? The next day. Rerosu Elementary School, Mizudafu. Jiro-chan, wait up. Izuku called as he ran after his friend. They had both gone to the same school once they left Ria kindergarten, and they were both now in the 2nd grade, albeit in different classes. "Come on, Izuku," the purplet called back, waiting impatiently for him to catch up to her. "We're gonna be listening to my mom and dad's new song today." Jiro Kyotoku was a music composer, while Jiro Mika was a musician with a preference for punk rock. Both had earned enough in their respective fields to build a small recording studio attached to their home, where all of Mika's songs were tried out before going on to the record company. Their daughter had inherited their talent with music, and the two often let her listen to their songs to get a more honest second opinion, mostly because Kyotoku was a doting husband and couldn't say a bad word about his wife to save his life. Since the two had bonded in kindergarten, Izuku had often been invited to join her in these listening sessions. "Sorry, I was helping the teacher carry things to the staff office," the greenette replied sheepishly, rubbing the back of his head as he caught up. "Again?" Kyoka groaned, pinching her nose in annoyance. "Dude, Kiryuin-sensei is a grown-up. She can handle carrying a few files." There were times her bestie's do-gooder attitude really got on her nerves. He was just so sweet. He helped teachers carry things, stopped fights between classmates, offered help on homework, fed stray animals. That honestly, the guy was a total cherub most of the time. It really made it hard to believe how tough he was when he went into what she dubbed badass mode. She'd only seen Izuku go there a few times since they became friends, but the verdette had several lines he wouldn't let be crossed. Push him there and you'd be shocked how fast the fluffy little kitten turned into a fierce tiger cub. "That's no reason not to be helpful, Jiro-chan," Izuku said reproachfully. That was another aspect of her friend's nature that irked Kyoka. He was so polite. She had given him permission to call her by her given name after they were friends for a year, and he'd never once used it. Probably has something to do with whoever that Kakin kid was, the purplet thought, a flash of anger sparking in the back of her mind at the though. It had taken a bit of time, but she'd eventually been able to get the full story around Izuku and his history with his former friend Tormentor both before and after his 4th birthday from him and his mother. Even now, there were times she really wanted to meet the little prick and give him a nice close look at her jacks before raising the volume up to 11 on his butt. Kyoka's quirk was very similar to her mother's, close enough to share the name of earphone jack, but like many cases, her quirk had grown a bit when it had been passed on to the next generation. Mika could use her jacks as listening devices just like her daughter, but could only channel the sound of her heartbeat through it, causing a small surge of pain. Jiro, on the other hand, could amplify the sounds of her heartbeat to a level that she could easily crack stone if she wanted, although it hurt her to push herself that far. Izuku, the little quirk geek that he was, had theorized that it was the influence of her father's quirk that had prompted that mutation. Her dad's quirk, Sound Enhance, allowed him to act as a living amplifier, multiplying the strength of any noise he produced or that was produced by something he was touching. "Fine, whatever," Kyoka muttered. It wasn't worth arguing with her friend over something like that. "Let's just get going already. I want to meet up with Mum on the way." As luck would have it, Kyoka lived nearby, so Mika met them halfway, just in front of the first set of traffic lights they would have to cross. Jiro Mika was a pretty woman, in a demure way. She had the same purple hair as her daughter, with a large bang of it hanging over the right side of her face, and she wore square glasses. Wearing fairly ordinary clothes consisting of a thigh-length black skirt, lilac tights, a white sleeveless shirt, and a plain jacket over that, she was pretty but couldn't really be compared to her stage persona. Something Mika tried to do as much as possible, keeping her stage life as far away from her home life as possible. "Ah, Kyoka-chan, Izuku-chan, how was school today?" Mika asked, offering the two kids a serene smile. Like her daughter, Mika was a rather stoic individual, keeping her emotions close to the chest unless she was alone or with people she truly trusted. In Kyoka's case, when combined with her father's triangular eyes and slightly more severe features, this made her look irked most of the time. "Boring," Kyoka replied with a huff. "I had fun," Izuku said with a smile. "Is your song ready?" "Yes, it is. Kyotoku is doing some last-minute adjustments, but he's just fussing," Mika replied as she grabbed a hand from each of the two and started to lead them back to her home. "I think this song's going to be a good one." As her daughter and her friend chatted on the way to their home, Mika's smile became a bit warmer. Kyoka had been smiling so much more since she met little Izuku. Despite her attempts to seem annoyed with his goody-two-shoes nature, it was obvious to both of Kyoka's parents that she was truly attached to the smaller boy. Her daughter tried too much to imitate her own stoic nature, keeping the teasing she'd undergone at her old kindergarten to herself, but luckily a member of the staff had enough of a conscience to inform her and her husband about it before things went too far, advising them to pull Kyoka out of that kindergarten due to its anti-mutation leanings. Despite their quirks being a hybrid of mutation and emitter, Mika was well aware that there were plenty of people who were stupid enough to have a bias against mutation quirks just because they tended to make their owners differ greatly from the human norm. She'd been absolutely furious that her precious daughter had been bullied for such a baseless reason, quickly putting her foot down and withdrawing Kyoka in the same day she'd confirmed it. She'd also put in an anonymous tip to the local authorities and school board regarding the leanings of the kindergarten. She'd been quite pleased to learn that it had been shut down a month afterwards, and the results for her daughter spoke for themselves. She was happy, healthy, and growing up beautifully, and had even found herself a bestie in the form of the quiet, but sweet, Izuku. Mika smiled as she saw her home in the distance. She wondered what the two kids would think of her new song. That Saturday. Enria Dojo. Ha-a-ia. Izuku breathed out as he launched one of his fists forward, slamming it into Bushi Masua's waiting palm. The golden aura around his body flared with the exhalation, pulsing brightly into the karate teacher's arm and forcing the arm, which was nearly as thick as Izuku's torso, back several inches. "Whoa there!" Masua muttered in approval, shaking his hand out slightly. "That one had some power, little man. It actually stung." Coming from Masua, whose muscles were so dense that they acted as a form of subdermal armor against most forms of blunt force, that was a real compliment, especially for someone who hadn't even hit PBR2I yet. There was no doubt that the kid would be a powerhouse one day. "You've been practicing," he added thoughtfully. The kid's timing and control with his quirk had really been improving lately. "The Qigong and Nigong breathing exercises that Sensei's been teaching me really helps," Izuku said as he shook his own hand gingerly. That had felt like punching a frozen side of beef. "You may want to try a ki as well," the karateka offered. "Letting out a yell infused with pure ki or chi might help you further refine your control and release. It might not as well, but it's worth thinking about giving a try at least." The large man grinned before leaning forward conspiratorially. "Beside, all the cool heroes have a battle cry, right?" "Right." Izuku nodded happily, his mind instantly going to one battle cry in particular. "Well, you two will have to wait a bit to test that out," Kanzashi offered from the entryway. Coming into the dojo proper, she grinned at her student and husband. "There's a new student who's going to show up soon, and I was hoping Izuku you could spar with them." The Hamon quirk user perked up slightly. Saturdays were usually when he got personal training from Kanzashi. For his master to have purposely invited a new student over, that must mean they studied martial arts before coming here, he guessed. "I think you'll get a challenge out of this one." The Tai Chi master smirked before a knock came from the front door. "Ah, that'll be them now. 2 secs." Kanzashi headed out and was back a bit over a minute later, accompanied by 2 females that were obviously mother and daughter, both having the same bright orange hair and teal-colored eyes. The older one had tired bags under her eyes and looked every bit the part of a busy, overworked housewife. The younger looked to be the same age as Izuku and was wearing a green t-shirt and cream skirt with a sports bag in one hand, likely holding her own GI. Unlike her mother, who wore her hair straight and cropped at the base of her neck, hers was tied up in a long side ponytail. Her eyes had immediately started curiously moving over the dojo before locking onto Izuku. "Dear Izuku, allow me to introduce you to Kendo Itsuwa and her daughter, Kendo Itsuka," Kanzashi offered with a smile. "Kendo-san, Itsuka-chan, this is my husband Bushi Masu. He's the one who specializes in karate, so he'll be acting as Itsuka's primary teacher while she studies here. The little one is my personal disciple and student, Midoriya Izuku." "Hello, Bushi-sensei, Midoriya-kun." Itsuwa smiled tiredly. "Say hello, Itsuka." "Hi." Are you strong? Itsuka asked immediately, her eyes still locked onto Izuku. Erdara. Izuku floundered. Even with being friends with Jiro for 3 years, he was still a bit nervous around girls. He is. Kenzashi confirmed. He's a bit shy but still one of the strongest boys in his age group. He hasn't fought any girls aside from me yet though. Mum told me it's bad to hit girls. Izuku said with a frown. Just running up and hitting them out of nowhere for no reason, sure, but that's true for hitting just about anyone. Masuo agreed with a bark of laughter. But sparring with them when they are also trying to hit you, or fighting back if they're attacking you for real, is perfectly permissible. It can actually be insulting to refuse to spar with someone based simply on their gender. I'm not trying to be mean. Izuku protested. Then you won't mind sparring with Itsuka-chan here, Quirk's allowed. Kenzashi said briskly. This was something else she had been meaning to do. Japanese culture looked down on boys hitting girls, regardless of the last 2.5 centuries of Quirks influencing things. Izuku had internalized that idea more strongly than most and had found very creative ways to avoid sparring with the female members of the dojo. She was certain that at least a part of it was due to that former friend of his that Inko had mentioned. The other boy had run around doing whatever he wanted to whoever got in his way after his quirk appeared, and the idiots in charge of him had allowed it. Izuku's negative experiences with that kind of behavior had likely resulted in him, consciously or not, taking his behavior in the opposite direction, finding excuses to avoid fighting or hurting others when he could help it. It was a misguided approach that was only going to overstress and harm the child in the future, and it was well past time that it was dealt with. Okay. Izuku said meekly. Good boy. Limber up while Itsuka-chan gets changed. Kenzashi ordered. With Itsuka. Kendo Itsuka followed the strong lady to what she was informed was the girl's changing room with a pensive expression on her face, one that Kenzashi noticed. What's up, kid? She asked. Why is hitting girls so bad to that boy? Itsuka asked as she started to change clothes. There's a bit of a story there. The Tai Chi teacher sighed, thinking for a moment on what to tell without violating her disciple's privacy. You see, a couple years ago, Izuku had a friend. When that friend awakened his quirk, it turned out to be pretty strong, and Izuku's friend let that go to his head. The other boy started using his quirk to do whatever he wanted and turned into a bully. Bullies are dumb, the Orangette quickly put in, with all the surety of a young child stating a fact of the world. Yes, they are. Kenzashi agreed with a small smile. Anyway, Izuku is naturally a very kind boy. He saw how his old friend acted and he's tried to be the exact opposite, doing his best to not hurt people whenever he could. We had a devil of a time getting him to start sparring properly because of that. That sound silly. Itsuka offered, tilting her head slightly as she tightened her belt. People tend to be pretty silly at times, and boys get silly ideas stuck in their heads, the elder martial artist stated with a small shrug. Your mother sent over your records when she filled out the paperwork. 10 spars in a row without a single defeat, very impressive. So, I'd like to ask a favor of you. When Itsuka looked at her curiously, she grinned. Give my silly little student a real hard fight. Push him as far you can. Show him that he has to fight back if he doesn't want to lose. After all, the best way for martial artists like us to talk is with our fists, so tell him loud and proud that you want to fight. Got it? Itsuka nodded. She liked helping people, and if beating this guy in a fight would help him, she was more than willing to step up. Returning to the main dojo showed that the boy, Izuku, was finished with his exercises and was a bit less nervous looking. Maybe Masuo-sensei had given him a talk of his own? Moving to the middle of the dojo floor, Itsuka entered into the starting stance her papa had taught her, designed to maximize the strength of their quirk, Big Fist. Izuku moved to stand opposite of her, 2 feet away, and fell into a strange stance that she guessed was some kind of Tai Chi stance. She'd never seen someone fight with Tai Chi before, she'd always thought it was just an exercise routine like yoga, but since this dojo seemed to specialize in both karate and Tai Chi, she was probably wrong about that. Ready? Kenzashi stood aside with her husband and Itsuwa and looked between the 2 kids. Seeing their nods, she raised her arm and then brought it down. Hajime. Immediately, Itsuka leapt forward on the attack. A strong offense was the best form of defense, her papa had said that, and she agreed. The fact that the strategy worked best with her quirk only helped matters. She started out by launching a quick 1-2 punch combo that her opponent easily dodged around, swiftly following with a sharp snap kick. This time the green boy couldn't dodge, instead blocking with both forearms and then using the same movement to knock her back and off balance, quickly following after with a counterattack, attempting to grab and throw her. He's moving way too slow, she thought irritably as she easily darted out of the way of the grab. He'd moved so much faster when he was blocking and dodging, so why were his attacks so slow? C locked eyes with her opponent and saw the slight traces of hesitation meandering in those green eyes, causing Itsuka's temper to flare. Sensei said that I needed to push you to take me seriously? Fine, then let's see if you're willing to listen when I let my quirk to do the talking for me. Charging in again, Itsuka threw both of her fists forward in a double punch that Izuku automatically moved to avoid, only for her to activate her quirk in the last moment. In a sudden surge, her fists grew to the same size as her torso, multiplying her range and power several-fold. Izuku didn't have any time to react as both enlarged fists raced towards him. So taken. Double jumbo fist, she cried as she struck. However, a moment later her eyes popped out slightly as she saw her opponent hadn't been sent flying by her best move. Instead, Izuku had somehow managed to bring his arms up to absorb most of the impact before flipping in midair and using the force of her blow to propel him backwards. The boy was still grimacing in pain from the impact to his arms, but it was nowhere near as bad as it could have been. Unclenching his arms, Izuku looked at her again, and she was pleased to see that the hesitation was gone. Instead, there was a spark of challenge in those narrowed eyes that had her blood pumping in excitement. Then he took in a deep breath before letting it out slowly, and suddenly his body erupted into an absolutely beautiful golden glow. Even more interestingly, there were small little bolts of what looked like golden lighting crackling over his fists. Itsuka took the mutters and gasps from the Bushi couple to mean that this was a new development. Ha-ha-ha, the green-haired boy breathed out slowly, the golden glow around his body intensifying slightly before he surged forward so quickly that Itsuka actually lost sight of him for a moment, only to see that he was right in front of her, one fist drawn back. Hamon Shiso. Ripple dash. Izuku intoned grimly before his fist flew forwards Itsuka's unguarded left side. She hastily blocked with her elbow, but the blow struck and then Izuku said something else. Overdrive, he hissed, and she felt the golden energy pulse for a moment before being sent flying back as if she'd been shot by a cannon. She quickly reoriented herself and landed feet first, skidding across the polished floor on her bare feet before launching herself back into the fray with an excited shout. Now this was what Itsuka called fun. As the two kids went at it, Kendo Itsuwa turned to Kanzashi and Masuo with wide eyes. I've never seen anyone her own age keep up with Itsuka once she starts using her quirk. Just who and what is that boy? Izuku-kun possesses the Hamon quirk. It's an emitter type that allows him to create and control that golden energy surrounding his body. Replied, noting the skills of the girl fighting his wife's apprentice with an interested mien. The energy acts as a powerful physical enhancer, augmenting his strength, speed, endurance, reflexes and durability to astonishing levels while he maintains that aura of his. In addition, he can manipulate his energy to further amplify the power or even the damage of his strikes. I have to admit, your daughter's already a very talented fighter. She's the first student in his own age category to land a solid blow on Izuku-kun in the past 6 months. Really? Itsuwa blinked, surprised that there seemed to be someone who could match her martial arts prodigy of a daughter. Well, the credit goes to my husband. He's the one who taught her our family's style of karate. We've just had to move from Chiba Prefecture due to my job changing, and my idiot husband threw his back out moving things. I told him we should just hire movers, but note that now we have to hire movers. Itsuka has to learn at an outside dojo until my husband recovers, and we have doctor's bills. Got us so much for saving money. Sounds tough. Kanzashi said lightly as she eyed her apprentice's movements. Ever since Itsuka had landed her first blow, There hadn't been as much as a hint of hesitation or holding back in his movements. Good, a solid challenge was just what the doctor ordered. Izuku worked harder and fought smarter than almost any of the other students his age, and more than a few of those older than he was, so he was already at a level surpassing most of his age group. That was fine, but not being properly challenged could cause his skills and strength to plateau. That wouldn't do if he wanted to become a hero. Which he did. It was impossible to know Izuku and not see the passion he had for his dream. As the two kids staggered back from one another after another exchange, the Tai Chi master decided to end it before they could actually hurt each other. Okay, that's enough, both of you. Izuku and Itsuka looked up at her in surprise. Normally the spar would continue until one person scored a match point. This spar was only to determine Itsuka-chan's skill level, as well as break through your inability to fight girls, Izuku. Kanzashi said with a chuckle. Itsuka-chan, you've done very well. It would be our pleasure to have you attend our dojo. Thank you, sensei. The young Orangette bowed, a happy expression on her face. Once both Itsuka and Izuku cleaned themselves up and got changed, the former and her mother had to head off to register for school, while Izuku had to wait for his mother to come and pick him up. Hey Midoriya. Itsuka called before she left. Next time we fight, I'm gonna win. Startled for a moment, Izuku smiled shyly at her before replying, Not if I can help it. The three adults present suppressed smiles at the slight competitive spirit that the children had. A few minutes after Itsuka left, Inko picked her son up. Looks like Izuku has a little rivalry. Starting up with Itsuka-chan. Kanzashi mused to Masuo once they were alone. It'll be good for him. Good for them both. Nothing better than a rival to help push a talented kid just a bit farther. Her husband rumbled as he was distracted by something he'd noticed during the spar. Dear, do you think that Tai Chi alone is completely suited for Izuku's fighting style? He tends to fight defensively with it fine, but offensively, aside from throws, he tends to be pretty linear. Like karate. Kanzashi agreed. So you think he should work on inventing his own style? A mixed martial art. Something like that. Masuo affirmed. He rarely makes use of quite a few portions of the Chin style, aside from practicing them. I'd guess that a custom style is needed to suit the use of his quirk anyway. Probably. I was hoping not to have to do that, but I guess it was wishful thinking, his wife sighed. Unseen by the two martial artists, a black and white checkered top hat faded from existence above their heads. Half a year later. Living room, Midoriya residence, Mizudafu town. Jiro Kyoka was smiling as she watched her best friend blowing out the candles on his 9th birthday cake, but couldn't help the not nice, angry possessive feelings that were bubbling up inside her stomach as she caught sight of a certain Orangette cheering on his other side. Kendo Itsuka had arrived at Rerosu Elementary about 6 months ago and she and Izuku had quickly become fast friends. The two had apparently already met and had a super intense, sparring match at the dojo Izuku went to the weekend before. Kyoka wasn't sure why, but the closer Itsuka got to Izuku, the more unsettling feelings she got toward the redhead. And it was hard to dislike Itsuka. The big fist quirk user was a bright, friendly girl who was easy to get along with and had a kind of big sister attitude to her. She was really good at taking care of people. She was almost as nice as Izuku in her own way. Less cherubic do-gooder and more protective big sis, but the two were definitely similar in a lot of ways, a thought that made Kyoka's stomach churn slightly. Kendo even had her own badass mode, only it came out a lot easier than Izuku's. All you needed to do was get her started on martial arts and she'd go all hardcore battle chick. Apparently Itsuka practiced a heavily modified version of Shotokan karate, one her dad had spent years specializing to work best with their big fist quirk, or so she said. Kyoka wasn't a martial artist by any stretch of the imagination, so she had no clue what the difference was between any given style of karate. Izuku did one of the two styles taught in his dojo was karate, and he'd been learning to integrate the Tai Chi moves that he'd learned and karate into a mixed martial art, whatever that was. The fact that Itsuka and Izuku meshed so well together and understood things about each that she didn't was really, really annoying for Kyoka, and she didn't even know why that was. All she knew was that seeing the two having fun together made her stomach churn in a way that was totally different to the times she had an upset stomach. "Oh wow, Jugen, this is..." Izuku's excited exclamation drew Kyoka from her brooding. He'd just opened her present to him, a CD album published last year that had theme music for all of the top 100 heroes in Japan at the time. This one was special though. Not only was it a limited edition copy, it included a sheet of paper signed by over 70 of the heroes featured on the CD. Her parents' connections in the music industry had managed to get this for Izuku, which was really lucky. Only 5 of those were ever made, 3 of them to go on a charity raffle at the next top 10 hero Billboard chart. Yes, she owed her mother some singing lessons, but it was worth it to see the awed and happy expression on her friend's face. "Like it?" she asked casually, then eeped as she was treated to a hug by Izuku. "It's so cool," the green-haired boy said with one of those genuine smiles of joy that made her heart go pitter-patter. "Thanks so much." "And no problem." Kyoka stuttered before she pushed him off. "And just call me by my first name. We've known each other for 5 years already." "She has a point, Izuku," Itsuka said, making Kyoka twitch at the yobasut that the orangette was showing, not using any honorifics towards Izuku at all. "Kyoka-san's long since given you permission to use her first name. Isn't it rude to ignore that?" I guess." Izuku frowned. "I'll try, okay, Jiro-chan?" "So long as you do," the purplet said with a nod. "Now get on with opening your presents." After the party was over and her mother came to pick her up, Kyoka was thinking a lot. So much so that her mother noticed. "What's got you twisted into knots?" Mika asked as they entered their house. "You just had a party with Izuku-chan, and you had a good time from what Inko-san said." "That girl, Kendo Itsuka?" Kyoka said reluctantly. She really didn't want to tell her mother this, but these weird feelings were going to drive her crazy if she didn't get some answers. Her mother was the most likely person to know something without freaking out like she knew her dad would. "Whenever I see her and Izuku together and having fun, I doubt it's like something hurts and burns inside me." "What's up with me, Mum?" Mika looked down at her adorably confused daughter and barely resisted the urge to squeal in joy. Fortunately, she had a lot of practice controlling her emotions when she wasn't in her stage persona, so she was able to swallow the reaction down to a small smile. Aloud, she said, "Isn't it obvious, Kyoka-chan? You're jealous." "Why dash?" The 8, soon to be 9 the next month, year-old girl squeaked in shock, her face flushing red. "You're jealous of Itsuka-chan, because before she showed up, there was no one as close to Izuku-chan as you were," Mika said, reinforcing the point. "Now a rival's appeared. And she's pretty, outgoing, caring and is interested in martial arts, and even goes to the same dojo that Izuku attends. The question is, what do you want to do now?" "What do I?" Kyoka gulped. "I met your father when I was around your age. We only met in passing on a school trip, but when we met later on during high school, we recognized one another and hit it off, and the rest, as they say, is history." The singer-songwriter mused happily, before a small grin appeared on her face. "You want to be a hero, so does Izuku-chan. Training together for that goal doesn't seem like a bad idea. You only know a few basic defense techniques, but I think being able to combine your quirk with martial arts for when a villain gets up close and personal might be wise, don't you agree?" Blinking up at her mother, Kyoka processed what she was saying before a grin crossed her face too. "Sounds like a plan, but will Dad let me? You had to push him into letting me go to those self-defense classes." Mika patted her daughter on the head. "Don't you worry about a thing, dear, you just leave that to me." In truth, Kyotoku was all for their daughter starting to attend classes with Izuku rather than simply relying on basic self-defense lessons. He'd made friends with a few of the heroes while he'd been helping produce the theme song collection they'd given to Izuku as a gift, and he'd learned from them that just knowing some basic self-defense techniques wouldn't be worth that much as a hero. Kyoka simply hadn't shown any interest in that kind of training, and they hadn't wanted to pressure her into it. Still, it was fine. She had plenty of time to train hard before applying to UA with Izuku. As a mother, Mika wanted to help her daughter fulfill her dreams and also protect her as much as possible. Having Kyoka attend Izuku's classes at the Enryu Dojo would help both goals. It's so cute how she can't see how she's got a crush on Izuku-chan. She thought as she headed to the kitchen to get started on dinner for when her husband got in from work. He was fighting the greedy, bloated ego of her record company again, and he needed a nice meal to welcome him home. Life was good for the Jiro family. The next day, Katsuki's room, Bakugo family home. Life for the now 9-year-old Bakugo Katsuki had, frankly, gone down the crapper over the past 3.5 years, at least in his own opinion. Currently lying on his bed, scowling up at the ceiling, Katsuki was taking a moment to brood over how his life had gone downhill, something that was becoming more common over the years with his normal means of venting curtailed. Ever since he'd been transferred out of Dantuan preschool, everything seemed to be conspiring to keep him from his self-proclaimed rightful place at the top. His mother was constantly watching him like a hawk and had cracked down severely on his usage of his quirk outside of practice, which she was insisting on keep an eye on as well. The slightest crackle of an explosion in a show of temper and he'd lose some privilege for at least a night. Ever worse, his new schools, first Terisu Preschool and then Tataran Elementary School, refused to acknowledge his superiority and constantly shut him down whenever he showed any signs of putting the extras in their place. All that, plus the infuriatingly frequent visits to that med shrink that his mother forced him to attend, were constantly putting Katsuki on the edge of a full-scale detonation. Unfortunately, at least from Katsuki's point of view, those same therapy sessions were producing some results. His ego had been reduced to a somewhat more manageable size and his attempts to assert his superiority were becoming increasingly sparse. As a bonus, at least according to his old hag of a mother, he was no longer so leery of accepting help from others. Gritting his teeth, Katsuki growled under his fault as his mind turned to the cause of his problems. This is all your effing fault, Deku. His life had started going downhill when that shitty nerd had dared to develop a quirk and stand against him, upsetting the rightful balance of the world. If these FNG nuisances keep me from becoming the #1 pro hero, I will hunt you down and explode you into mincemeat. For all of Katsuki's life, there was a simple but firm belief that guided him. Heroes were the ones who won. To fight and win against whoever was a villain was what a hero was meant to do. Rescuing people? If you took down the villain quick and hard enough, then no one would need to be rescued, 'cause the threat would be gone. That was why All Might was #1, an unequaled power that no villain could stand against, one that Katsuki would one day surpass. It was even part of his name, the Katsu of Victory. Yet everyone seemed to be determined to tell him he was wrong. The old hag, his old man, the teachers, that med therapist, even some of the extras at school who had more ball than brains. It set him off beyond all measure, because whenever they started spewing that kind of goody-goody bullshit about saving and protecting people, all he saw and heard was that med Deku. So you have a goddamned quirk? So what? Katsuki scowled at the ceiling, fists clenching but his quirk remaining contained for now. So some dumbass pencil pushers are trying to put restrictions on who can earn a hero license? So what? I'm gonna be the #1 hero and nothing is gonna stop me. Not the DMED know-nothing bureaucrats in the government, not some smart-mouthed quack, and not a little pain in the butt like you, Deku. I'll crush you like a bug when I get to you if you dare to show your face there, just like I always did. Once a Deku, always a Deku. His thoughts momentarily calmed by his declaration, the explosion quirk user got up to finish his homework. Later. Office, Enryu Dojo. So, Kanzashi said calmly as she viewed the woman sitting across the desk from her. You are not. I'm sorry, I'm not very good at reading Chinese characters. Ran Xiaoyu, the woman replied softly. She was a young woman, in her mid-20s or thereabouts, her black hair tied up in a tight bun, held in place with wooden Kanzashi hair pins. She had heterochromatic eyes, with one being yellow and one being crimson-red. She was an average-sized woman, wearing blue jeans, a t-shirt and a denim jacket. Ran Sanden, the Tai Chi master said with a nod. Now, you are the third applicant we've had for the teacher position we have open here, and the other two haven't been very impressive, truth be told, so impress me and you likely have a job. Now, what qualifications in martial arts do you have? I am an accredited master at Yin and Jiang style Bagwazang, Tianjin-style Shui Jiao, and I was close to attaining my mastery of Wu Hao-style Tai Chi before I left China. Ran stated, pressing a manila folder onto the desk demurely and pushing it forwards. Picking it up and opening it, Kanzashi had to whistle at the certificates of mastery it contained. She recognized a few of the names on them as she flipped through each sheet. Each was well known in the martial arts community as a strict and demanding taskmaster, and several were well known for demanding that quirks not be used or else be as limited as possible during sparring matches and training sessions. Getting a mastery awarded from just one of them was more than worthy of recognition. Well, these are some impressive qualifications, she noted aloud. Better than mine even. Do you have a martial arts teaching license? Sadly, I do not. The Chinese woman shook her head, her barely accented Japanese sounding worried. I was not expected to pass my arts down to anyone, which is one of the reasons I left my family and country to emigrate here. Well, with these mastery certificates, that isn't too much of a hurdle. The dojo master offered ambivalently. And if you want, I can complete your training in Wu Hao Tai Chi. I'm a master in all 5 of the main Tai Chi styles. A flicker of surprise crossed Ran's eyes. That would be appreciated, thank you. Might I ask what your quirk is? Kanzashi asked curiously. Our dojo's central philosophy is mastering the body through training and dedication that includes encouraging combining the use of quirks with martial arts in order to better master them as well, so if you have one which is easy to control. My quirk is called shock absorption. It is classified as a mutant-type quirk that allows my body to absorb the vast majority of force behind physical impacts and nullifying them, up until a certain point anyway. The Chinese woman replied. Sounds like a useful quirk to have in a fight. The Tai Chi master offered, slightly envious. It was certainly one which you could use to go pro-hero, in her opinion. My family disapproves of passive quirks, Ran said, her visage becoming slightly uncomfortable. They are of the opinion that a power that is used outside of someone's control is a power that can be used against the user. I won't say that it's the stupidest philosophy I've ever heard because I've seen quite a few ridiculous ones bantered about in my day, but it's still pretty far up there. Kanzashi offered in a deadpan. Compared to what people like the Meta Liberation Army and the Dying Quirkless Freedom Alliance, amongst others, believed in, that kind of banal stupidity was fairly vanilla. Annoying and stupid, but not exactly groundbreaking. Okay, so, your family. Are they likely to cause problems for my dojo if I hire you? No. Ran shook her head firmly. I was disowned after I refused to bow to my parents' wishes and marry someone old enough to be my grandfather, for the sake of the family, so I doubt they'll bother to remember I exist. Well, that was something anyway. And you don't have your family's biases? Kanzashi checked. I admit to having a personal preference to quirks that require conscious activation, but I have never been one to allow those preferences to color my judgment. The Chinese woman replied calmly. Fair enough. Everyone was allowed their own preferences after all, whether it was a preference in looks, clothing, food, or even quirks. As long as the other young woman could keep it from biasing her teaching, then Kanzashi couldn't care less about her preferences. To warn you, there are at least 2 quirkless students who attend this dojo, one in the karate class and one in the tai chi class. Kanzashi continued cautiously. This was where the last applicants had fallen though. Both had been discriminatory against those without quirks. One had gone far enough to ask why teaching useless throwbacks was even worth their time. Needless to say, the man wouldn't be getting the job. Luckily, Ran simply shrugged her shoulders absently at the question. I don't really have an opinion on the quirkless, she offered evenly. As long as they prove to be attentive students, I can see no problem teaching any that I am assigned. Kanzashi let out an internal sigh of relief at that. They could work with that kind of outlook easily enough. She and her husband had planning to add another instructor to the dojo for a while now thanks to the rising popularity of the Enrya dojo. Most of the other dojos in Mizudafu specialized in the latest, quirk-based, martial arts that had started to emerge since the start of the so-called Age of Heroes. Most were semi-decent martial arts in theory, particularly when they were combined with a specific type of quirk. Sadly, in practice, The amount of ego-stroking, brown-nosing and outright pandering that most of said dojos paid towards students with particularly powerful or well-suited quirks tended to make the places ineffective schools and little more than cults of personality around a star student. Thus, most sensible parents started looking elsewhere for places for their children to study. She and Masuo weren't going to turn down the extra business, but they needed extra hands to ensure proper supervision. While it was traditional for senior students to supervise the lessons of the younger students, it was necessary to have proper instructors, who had qualifications and experience, to truly teach their students. Adding a couple of new branches of martial arts to those they already offered would simply be an added bonus. Okay, well, I can arrange for you to get a teaching certificate within the month, providing you study hard enough. Kanzashi said evenly. Barring you failing the exam, I'll look forward to seeing you show up as a teacher. As for your lessons in Tai Chi, let's discuss a time which is suitable for both of us so I can see exactly how far you have to go before I can certify you as a master of Wu Hao. By the time Ran Xiaoyu left her office, Kanzashi was fairly confident that they would have a new instructor in about a month's time. She returned to the paperwork when a name caught her eye in one of the notes left for her by Masuo. He'd taken care of the dojo yesterday while she had gone to fetch more training dummies. Jiro Kyoka, why does that sound familiar? Oh right, that's Izuku-kun's friend. She mused aloud. So her mother's enrolled her in a class to find out which suits her better, karate or tai chi? Well, this'll be interesting for Itsuka-chan. The young Orangette was quite proud of her status as Izuku's rival in martial arts, and the two had quickly become the other's favorite sparring and training partner. The last 6 months of this had firmly broken Izuku of his disinclination to spar with girls, which was excellent progress in her opinion. It was a sweet and gallant attitude in its own way, but Kanzashi knew very well that there were plenty of female villains out there, and they wouldn't hesitate to take advantage of gallantry. Returning to the main point, Itsuka was somewhat possessive of her status as Izuku's rival, so having a friend of Izuku's, who was a cute, grumpy, sun girl, as the big fist quirk user had called Jiro Kyoka once, come in and start learning martial arts was bound to set off some jealous vibes for the girl, which would confuse her. Itsuka was a genuinely good person who could get along with almost anyone. She'd even managed to make some of the more snotty brats get knuckled down and working hard. She was a shoo-in for an assistant dojo master, or she would be if she didn't plan on becoming a hero. Still, she was as human as anyone, and she was very protective of her time spent training with her rival, so there was a possibility of conflict with Kyoka. Well, I'll just have to keep an eye on the three of them. Kanzashi sighed. Izuku, being a young boy, was a bit lacking in the finer points of awareness when it came to how females interacted. For all that the boy was quite bright, but he was still just a boy and, like most males, lacked the ability to read the subtleties of female-female interactions. There was a chance something he said could set off a landmine, which would be bad. Remembering the few times that even her husband stepped on a conversational landmine around her, the Tai Chi master chuckled. Well, at least things aren't going to get boring around here. Same to. So she works at the Enri dojo? A voice wheezed. There's no mistake? The doctor in the room shivered at the words. Even so, he replied respectfully. No mistaking it, master. She changed her surname from Chin to Ran, but there is no doubt that it is her. The Dark Emperor of the Japanese underworld, all for one, breathed in and out as he eyed the numerous pieces of medical equipment surrounding him with distaste. That accursed fool All Might had all but crippled him, managing to do something that many would have considered impossible, overloading and either damaging or destroying most of his longevity and healing quirks over the course of their battle. The damage had been so bad that he'd been forced to strip away the vast majority of most of them, discarding the broken remains into a number of lab rats, just so that the few working remnants he had left could be safely bundled together and put back to something approaching working order. Even then, they were barely enough to help keep him alive, let alone actually restore him. His original quirk, All for One itself, was more of a quirk manager than a quirk thief. Rather than simply absorbing and redistributing quirks, he could even break them down into multiple smaller, weaker quirks or even strip away aspects of a quirk and combine it with others as he liked, within reason, in order to augment or optimize them before either using the new hybrid himself or gifting it to another. It was truly an awe-inspiring ability, the power to reshape power itself to suit his desires, and one that was truly appropriate for one who sought to rule. Sadly, no power came without costs or weaknesses, and All for One was no exception. Quirks he'd taken and altered tended to be a bit unstable. If they were mishandled or overworked, it could have rather nasty consequences, both for the quirk and its host, including the quirk factor itself breaking down rather violently. He thought he'd countered this by stockpiling multiple copies of similar quirks so that, even if one broke down, he'd have backups, and backups for his backups. Unfortunately, All Might had proven that his precautions hadn't been as comprehensive as he'd hoped. At the very least, he had scored a strong blow back against the eighth bearer of One for All before he had been forced to scurry away in defeat, dealing a solid wound on All Might's chest, ripping into a lung. But somehow the large-muscled man had managed to dodge away before he could drive the blow deeper down into his abdomen. A kind of latent sixth sense from his experience in battle, perhaps? How annoyingly persistent of the man. Dr. Tsubasa wishes to acquire her quirk for his project, he said. Eventually. What quirks do the dojo masters possess? Bushi Masuwa possesses the bulk-up quirk, while his wife Kanzashi possesses the body memory quirk, the doctor replied, having anticipated this inquiry. Useful, but fairly weak quirks overall, master. Perhaps, but in skilled enough hands, even a needle can overcome a sword. All for One wheezed out. Even before his defeat, he had known that raw power was not the only factor in deciding victory. Both are skilled martial artists and likely have trained to use their quirks in tandem with that doctor. Do not underestimate them. Hiring a martial artist to deal with as a martial artist is the right plan here. Prepared. Yes, master. That should be prepared inside of the next 2 days, the doctor said evenly. He was very much relieved that his quirk wasn't of any interest or use to his master. Doctor, the 200-year-old man croaked. Now, please, call Dr. Tsubasa in for me. There's much to discuss regarding Project Nomu. A week later, Enria Dojo. Kanzashi adjusted the stance of her newest female student slightly before nodding in approval. It had been just under a week since Kyoka had joined the dojo. The young musician had shown a bit more talent in Tai Chi than in karate, though it was not for a lack of talent in either. Rather, it was a simple fact that Tai Chi's more fluid movements suited her build more than karate's fairly rigid stances. Now, try that again, she instructed the purplet, who nodded and slowly moved through the basic kata that she had been learning since she arrived. The girl looked pretty cute in her GI, and the way she absently controlled her mutation quirks jacks in imitation of the movements of her arms was adorable as well. Not to mention the way she blushed when Izuku helped her. Itsuka, as Kanzashi had half expected, was more than a little jealous that her rival was spending time helping to train a new girl rather than practicing with her, even if she didn't recognize that fact about herself. She and Kyoko were approaching the beginnings of PBRTY, and girls did develop emotionally faster than boys, so it would be very interesting time for Izuku when his two best friends were more emotionally mature than he was. Okay, very good, Kyoko-chan, she said as the girl went through the kata nai perfectly. You have the right kind of dedication to make Tai Chi a solid weapon in your arsenal when you become a hero. Kyoka blushed lightly. Thank you, Bushi-sensei. Okay, so now you've mastered this kata going slow, you have to learn how to use it quicker. It's a lot harder to master the kata when you're moving at a more normal pace, but with time and effort I'm sure you'll pull it off splendidly. Kanzashi informed her, demonstrating the same kata the girl had just used, but accelerated to combat speed. This kata is one shared by all of the styles of Tai Chi. Once you have this mastered, I'll test you to see which of them you are more suited for. Now try to speed up one step of the kata at a time. As she supervised Kyoka, Kanzashi watched Ran Xiaoyu out of the corner of her eye. The woman was a good teacher and generally a fairly nice person as well, but seemed to keep most at arm's length. She kept an emotional distance from her students, which wasn't entirely inappropriate for the most part, but would it kill her to smile? All movement in the dojo stopped cold as the sound of wood breaking, more like being smashed into kindling, from the direction of the entrance to the dojo. Kids, gather on the other side of the dojo floor, now. Kanzashi snapped instantly, moving to place herself between her students and whatever was to come through the door. Adrenaline started pumping through her body and she switched from dojo mode to real combat mode, mentally accessing several forms and techniques of her Tai Chi that she usually partitioned from herself to prevent her from using them by accident. It was a minor, if useful, technique of her quirk with a bland name, memory partitioning. She could mentally assign certain movements and techniques to folders and restrict or grant access to them for her body as she pleased. It was what a lot of people would think of as a useless technique, as it only restricted and weakened her, but as a teacher, certain forms and techniques were too deadly to show to or use against students, so it was her most often used quirk technique. The children trembled as they huddled together on the other side of the dojo floor, Ran Xiaoyu standing in front of them protectively as a series of thuds came from the corridor leading from the front door. Into the room strode a large man, with long, straggly white-gray hair, bound in a rough ponytail. He had cement-gray skin that seemed to sag slightly off his musculature, yellow eyes with bloodshot veins in them, and his clothes were a filthy and ragged GI, with a worn and ratty black belt securing it at the waist. He was barefoot, his cracked and broken toenails standing out vividly. "You the dojo master, little girl?" the man asked, his voice hoarse and deep, like rocks grating against rocks. It's usually considered polite to introduce yourself before asking the name of another, not least waiting to be invited into somewhere. Kanzashi replied tightly. "Impudent stripling. I'm Zanki, no surname worth mentionin'." The man sneered harshly. "Quirk's called Dead Cell and I've been hired to trash this little dojo." A dojo destroyer, in this day and age? The only present master of the Enryu dojo scoffed in return. "Well, you'll see that I'm no pushover." "Chanced be a fine thing, kid." Zanki scoffed as he flexed his large hands menacingly. "My quirk was fucking useless while I was alive, 'cause I could only control dust and even then not all of it. Was a right big surprise when I woke back up after I died, my quirk keeping my body together. And moving even when all life should have bled out of it. That's the power I've got at my hands, chitlin. I'll live forever by the power of my quirk and with the skills I spent my livin' years acquirin', I'm unmatched in a fight. I've been undead and kickin' for over 110 years now, and been fightin' through most of it. I don't get tired, I don't lose focus, my strength is greater than yours and will never flag, and I've got at least a century's worth of experience on ya. What do you have to hope to match me?" "A smaller ego," Kanzashi replied dryly, absently wondering why villains always love to monologue. "And watch your language, there are children within hearing distance." "Got a smart mouth on ya?" Zanki growled, cracking his knuckles. "Let's see how well you talk with it after I punch your teeth out." With an unimpressed mien to her, Kanzashi flowed into a defensive Tai Chi stance, ready for her opponent. Master of the 5 major styles of Tai Chi, and joint master of the Enryu Dojo, Bushi Kanzashi. She stated. Practitioner and master of Shotokan Karate, Shitsuyona no Zanki, Zanki the Relentless. The undead quirk user responded with a snarl. "Now I attack." Izuku, who was crouched next to Kyoka and Itsuka, watched in awe as Kanzashi smoothly blocked and redirected several punches from the man. "What's she doing?" Kyoka asked with wide eyes. "She's just rotating her arms and it's blocking his punches. It's a mid-level technique called Keikiai." Izuku whispered back. "Kanzashi-sensei's been teaching it to me, but I still haven't managed to get to work yet." She's spinning her arms to negate or dissipate the force of his blows. Tai Chi, what an inadequate art to use. Zanki scoffed as his arms began to blur as he focused more and more strength into each blow. A fool's practice, little more than a bit of fancy exercise package to look like a true fightin' art. Having such a thing taught at a dojo, it'll be a right pleasure to break this sign over my knee. Your knowledge is apparently as lacking as your sense of hygiene, O undead one. Kanzashi replied coolly, her arms flowing through the motions of her keikai, diverting and redirecting the majority of force behind her opponent's blows away from her. The man in front of her was strong, but compared to her husband, who she sparred with regularly, his strength was inconsequential. Tai Chi is an art that focuses on the balance of yin and yang within oneself, keeping one's body healthy with the exercise forms, nourishing one's mind with its teachings, and protecting one's body with its combat forms. It is an art for living, growing, and flourishing oneself. Fah! The man snorted, stomping forwards with his left foot and sent a fist towards her face, whilst the other flew toward his stomach hidden in the shadow of the first. It was a move forbidden in tournaments, the Yamazuki. Much to his mild surprise, the woman dodged both blows, and then unleashed a quick barrage of punches that he didn't bother blocking or dodging. Zanki merely sneered as he pushed through the blows and launched a return strike of his own, forcing the Tai Chi practitioner back onto the defensive. Fool woman, I already told you my body's dead as old wood, the undead martial artist spat out as he pursed her. I don't feel pain and it'll take more than your little love taps to do me any damage. You're going to have to do far better to stop me. He's not afraid of injury because his quirk doesn't let him feel pain and prevents most forms of attack from doing lasting damage. Izuku realized quietly as he mentally studied and analyzed the man's words and quirk. Well then, allow me to do so. Kanzashi growled, growing a bit irritated with the man's disrespect and more concerned with the threat he represented to herself and her students. She tensed before moving, her speed at the very limit of the human peak, to the point that she temporarily moved faster than Zanki's eyes could see. The next moment, she was behind him, fists drawn back. Brise. Thunder sound. She hissed before she exhaled using a special breathing technique. Much to the shock of all of those watching, her fist seemed to start vibrating visibly before it slammed into Zanki's back, driving the much larger man to his knees. Oof. Well, that might have smarted were I alive. The undead quirk user spat out as he stood up once again. You're certainly sturdy, I'll give you that. Kanzashi said with a frown. My arm was striking with the force of a bullet there. At the very least your spine should have been cracked by the impact alone, let alone the damage to your muscular tissue. I've already told you, my quirk is the ability to control dead cells, and since I'm little more than a walking corpse, that means my entire body's under my control. Zanki smirked wickedly as he turned to face her. More than that, I can absorb them into me from the dust in the air, store them within my own dead flesh, and then use them to help rebuild and repair any damage you manage to do. To put it simply, I'm invincible, you fool girl. You lost this fight the moment I decided to challenge you. There is no superiority before or during a fight, the Tai Chi master said diffidently. Only afterwards are you permitted to make one-sided declarations such as that. Teeth spoutin' that kind of twaddle even now, the man growled. You're looking to die, beach. There are children here, keep your language polite. Kanzashi warned him again before she used the special breathing method again, her entire body vibrating like her fist had before. So you've mastered that trick of yours to the point you can use it over your entire body? I'll admit, that's an impressive feat for a stripling not even in her 30s yet. Zanki admitted, though his sneer never left his face as he fell into a new stance of his own. But I've been fightin' for over 100 years now, girlie. I've seen, fought, and beaten more martial arts than you have ever even heard of. Do you think I've never faced the likes of that before? That I don't know how to beat it? Tetsuki Rendan. Iron Demon Barrage. His arms blurred, moving so fast that it was hard for the kids to see them. Kanzashi narrowed her eyes and used the keikai to try and block the attacks, but the force of the blows was far greater than before and blasted right through the defensive technique and into several places on Kanzashi's body. Gah! The woman gasped as she was thrown back by the force of the attack, slamming into the wall and lying against it, stunned. There's the trick to it. Like I said, every dead cell in my body is mine to command. That means I can condense them to the point that my limbs are as hard and dense as iron. Zanki boasted arrogantly. A bratling practicing a soft art with a weak quirk like yours should have never tried to step in my path. And I shishuebu. Mud wading steps. Another voice shouted, and abruptly, Zanki found himself surrounded by blurred images of Ran Xiaoyu, trapping him within a circle. HUHSO, you're the foreign strumpet with the shock absorption quirk? The dojo destroyer mused darkly. And this is the famous mud wading steps of Bagwazang, a technique that traps the opponent in a circle and hemming them in by the close proximity. Not a bad technique, but nowhere near enough. Testuzan Mawashi Jerry. Iron-cutting roundhouse kick. With a roar, he unleashed a fast roundhouse kick that slammed into Ran and sent her flying with a spray of blood from one shoulder. House! Shock absorption should have let her ignore that kick. Itsuka squeaked. Like I said, brat, all my dead cells are under my control. Shaping those in the front of my leg into something sharp enough to cut instead of simply smash is a simple thing with enough practice. Zanki stated, having overheard her. Shock absorption may make blunt force attacks moot, and even make most bladed attack next to worthless, but my kick there was just fast, not strong. All of the damage came from her running into my leg, not the other way around, so shock absorption didn't activate until the blade was already in her flesh. I underestimated him. Izuku gulped in fear, looking toward where both of his teachers were struggling to stand. He acts like nothing more than an arrogant musclehead at first, but it's obvious now that all of the things he's said about his knowledge and fighting experience weren't just empty boasts. He knows a lot about how both quirks and martial arts work and has developed technique to use his own quirk and fighting style in concert for the maximum effect. Now that the mother hens are down, I can deal with the chicks. A few broken bones will heal in a few months' time. The dojo destroyer sneered as he walked towards the children. And this dojo will never recover from the scandal. SE scum. Leave those children alone. Kanzashi shouted as she stood up. She had at least one broken bone from being hit multiple times by iron-hard fists, but she was dead if she was going to let her students suffer from harm. Izuku's heart sped up as he saw Zanki's eyes lock onto Kyoka. He firmly pushed himself in front of her and Itsuka, making the undead martial artist chuckle darkly. Try and protect your little girlfriends, kiddo? Well, you've got some iron in, yeah, I'll credit you that. The undead sneered down at him, a dark grin spreading on his lips. Alright, to respect your intentions, you're first. Exhaling, Izuku started the special breathing technique he'd been using for the last few years, making the glow of his Hamon energy spring up around his body. I have to fight. I have to protect my friends, he thought nervously as Zanki mockingly took such a loose and open stance that it practically begged Izuku to attack. A trap, in other words. But I can't beat him. What should I do? Young man, a voice said in his mind. His vision went gray. The figure of a man wearing a white suit with a white and black checker-printed top hat, facing away from him, appeared to his eyes. To face a monster such as this, in spite of your fear, is nothing short of true courage. Do not allow fear to cripple your courage or hamper your breathing. Overcome it, master it, and make it your own. We shall speak more later, but for now take this technique that my greatest student created and strike down this abomination. Suddenly, knowledge flowed into him and his vision cleared up, just as Zanki lunged into an attack, a fist that was slow compared to the ones he'd used against Kanzashi and Ran, but still faster than an ordinary child could normally respond to. Izuku leapt over the blow and clenched his right hand as words erupted from his mouth unbidden. My heart is burning with the heat of a raging fire. Feel the pounding beat of my pulse, he roared, the glow of his aura redoubling as he increased the amount of Hamon energy that he wore, making the infrequent sparks of lightning appear again. Nikokiro Hamon Shiso. Sunlight Yellow Overdrive. With a shout, Izuku punched at Zanki, the glow of his Hamon blinding by this point. Of course, Zanki managed to interpose a hand to catch the blow, but then something amazing happened. The energy of Izuku's Hamon quirk shot through the entire arm that Izuku's fist was connected to, which then sparkled with golden yellow lightning before falling from the rest of Zanki's body, the flesh sloughing off the bones. Gag! The undead martial artist screamed, feeling something akin to pain after over a century without. My arm. My arm. He staggered back, his remaining hand clutching at his dissolving arm in shock, the loose bones and liquefying flesh dribbling down onto the dojo's floor, smelling absolutely disgusting. Izuku almost gagged at the smell, but he managed to hold his gorge down, winding up another attack on the zombie-like man. Stay away. Effing brat. Zenki screamed, attempting to kick the boy away. Unfortunately for him, the haze of the first true pain he'd felt in over a century, mixed with the raw terror he was feeling that someone, a prepubescent kid no less, had managed to destroy one of his arms, left the movement blatant and sloppy to the point that even a child like Izuku could read it and react appropriately. Ducking under the kick, Izuku ground his teeth together as the golden energy of his quirk crackled around his fists. This man had hurt his sensei and had threatened his best friends that he was going down hard. Hamon so Tenken. Ripple twin heavenly fists, he shouted, leaping up, his body moving in echo of someone else's motions, one that Itsuka recognized, judging by how her eyes widened. That's my... In a perfect imitation of Itsuka's Sotaken technique, minus the enlargement both of his fists, Izuku slammed both of his fists into the upper body of Zenki the Relentless, the golden light and crackling golden lightning crackling over every remaining part of his body and head. How it was to a brat, to someone not even a decade old. Zenki choked out, his entire body starting to melt and break apart as the golden lightning danced across it. He tried to reassert control with his quirk, but the flesh refused to respond to Dead Cell, as if, for a brief moment, the flesh had been brought back to life even as it destroyed itself. Realizing that his immortality might well and truly be at an end, Zenki's fear boiled over into rage. This brat, if nothing else, I'm gonna take this brat down with me. Even as he reached for Izuku with his slowly dissolving arm, however, two people reacted quickly. Raise A. So Tenshu. Double palm. In a twin cry of anger, both of the teachers, who had been left gaping at both the ferocity of Izuku's attack and the effect his quirk was having on the undead, leapt into action and slammed their attacks into Zenki with enough force that Izuku was sent flying back, only to be caught by Itsuka and Kyoka. The previous resilience shown by the hired dojo destroyer was nowhere to be seen as his torso was pulped by the combination of the two techniques. With a pathetic gurgle, Zenki the Relentless died as his body, kept intact through the power of his quirk up until this point, collapsed under its own weight as it liquefied. The bones thumped onto the floor, leaving disgusting pile of sludge and bone across the dojo's floor. Heh, I did it. Izuku said with a blink of surprise before his eyes rolled back and he fell unconscious, much to the worry of Kyoka and Itsuka. Then, call the police. Kanzashi huffed as she shook her hand to get the essence of Zenki off it. And the on-call doctor. I want Izuku-kun looked over ASAP. Yes, Sifu. Ran nodded, moving off while holding the bleeding wound on her arm. She still had much to learn, so it seemed. Stepping around the puddle of Zenki's remains, Kanzashi checked over Izuku before smiling at the two fretting girls hovering nearby. He's okay, girls. He just pushed his quirk too hard and fainted in exhaustion. He should wake up once he's recovered. Nodding at the two relieved girls, Kanzashi turned and looked at what remained of one of the most powerful martial artists that she had ever fought. Taken down by a 9-year-old boy. Something tells me that this is only the beginning, she muttered before getting herself ready to answer the questions of the police. Later that day. Conference room, Mizudafu Central Police Station. It had not been a pleasant year for Detective Tsukachi. Things had been stressful from the start, but they had actually been making progress in their shadow war against the criminal overlord of Japan, and then All Might, his good friend, had been grievously wounded in his final showdown with the so-called Emperor of Darkness himself, all for one. The man had lost a lung and it had been nothing short of a miracle that he'd managed to avoid losing more before they'd managed to get him to a hidden emergency clinic. And now I'm dealing with what amounts to a zombie dojo destroyer that was apparently killed by a 9-year-old kid. What is wrong with this country? He mumbled as he absently nursed his cup of coffee. He'd been assigned this case as soon as he had reported in for duty this afternoon. All the present, adult witnesses had already given their statements, the scene had been cleared, photographed, and all evidence gathered and catalogued. They were still scheduling things with the various parents and/or guardians so they could get statements from some of the younger witnesses, but he doubted they'd be able to clarify the biggest head-scratcher of the entire mess. How had an entire adult body seemingly been liquefied by the quirk of a preteen boy whose quirk was clearly classified as a body enhancement type? And to make matters worse, he hadn't been on the case for more than an hour before he'd received the first of many phone calls, messages and other requests from various sources on how to close the case as quickly and simply as possible. Something he was disinclined to do considering the kind of social repercussions having this kind of thing on his record could have for the youngest individual involved, one Midoriya Izuku. He wasn't about to ruin a kid's entire future just to satisfy some pushy higher-ups, so he'd ended up calling in one of the favors he'd amassed over the past few years with a certain hero, and he was now just waiting for him to arrive. A sudden knock coming from the conference room's door made him flinch reflexively. He was still a bit high-strung after the past few years. "Come in," he called, hand inching away from his service weapon. A younger, uniformed officer quickly opened the door. "Detective, the investigation hero you called in has arrived," he offered. Tsukachi sighed in relief. Good to see he was as prompt as always. "Please escort him here right away." "Right away," agreed the officer with a nod as he left, returning a moment later with a familiar mammal of indeterminate species following sedately behind him. "Am I a dog, a mouse, or perhaps a bear? Who cares? I am Nizu and I am on the case." Nizu, principal of UA High, top investigative hero in Japan, and one of the top intel heroes in the world, stated happily as he waltzed into the room, dressed smartly as always in dress pants, a white shirt with a dark blue tie, a double-breasted waistcoat, and solid-looking sneakers. "Thank you for coming in so quickly, Principal Nizu." Tsukachi greeted his colleague with a slight sigh of relief, waving out the uniformed officer who closed the door behind him. He then gestured toward the conference room table that was currently hosting several stacks of file and folders, an electric kettle, a tea set, and a metal tin. "I have the case notes right here, as well as water on the kettle boiling and some fresh Earl Grey ready to be made." "Ah, it is always good to work with someone who already knows how to get things started properly," Nizu offered with a toothy smirk, clapping his paws together absently as he walked up the special stepladder that Tsukachi had long since had constructed out of his own pocket, specifically for this purpose, onto the table. "Now, why don't you walk me through the highlights of this case while I get everything prepared?" "Of course," the detective agreed, taking a seat while Nizu started preparing his tea. "Earlier today, a man broke into the Enryu Dojo, a martial arts school located on the outskirts of Mizudafu. The man, who identified himself as Zenki the Relentless, then proceeded to state his intentions of destroying the dojo before challenging the present dojo master, one Bushi Kanzashi, to a fight. Kanzashi-san is officially ranked as a master in all 5 main schools of Tai Chi and by all accounts put up an admirable fight against the assailant but was ultimately defeated. The assistant instructor, one Ran Xiaoyu, then attempted to intervene but was also defeated. The assailant then turned his attention to the gathered students, only for one of them to step forward to defend himself and his friends. The boy's own quirk seemed to have an unusual and lethal interaction with the assailant's body, causing it to rapidly disintegrate and liquefy. "Intriguing," Nizu offered as he poured himself a cup of the newly finished tea. "I suppose you've already ruled out a possible complication caused by either of instructor's quirks?" "I have. Both instructors have internal quirks, no outside effects at all," Tsukachi confirmed. Bushi Kanzashi possesses the body memory quirk that allows her to instantly memorize any physical action that her body performs at least once. Ren Xiaoyu possesses a quirk called shock absorption that allows her to negate the damage dealt by most forms of physical impacts up to a certain amount. Even the absent instructor doesn't have anything that could explain it. Bushi Masao's quirk is called Pump Up, and it only augments his muscle growth and development. "I see, and the deceased? What precisely was his quirk?" Nizu asked while sipping lightly at his tea. "That's where things start getting bizarre." The assailant referred to it as dead cell and claimed it allowed him to manipulate the dead cells of his body. Tsukachi stated, shuddering a bit as he recalled the specifics. He claimed that, in the past, it had only allowed him to manipulate small amounts of dust, but also that he died close to 100 years ago and that it allowed him to reanimate himself with all his faculties fully intact. Both instructors also stated that he demonstrated an inhuman ability to both ignore damage and manipulate his own body in a number of ways that shouldn't have been possible without an extremely powerful body-altering quirk. My, how utterly fascinating. Nizu breathed out, looking up from his tea with his dark eyes glinting in curiosity. Do we have any proof to the truth of his claims? I've contacted the National Quirk Registry. Luckily, the time frame he gave us was after the registry came into effect. We focused the initial search on anything from 120 to 80 years ago for safety's sake. Since we had a name, though we weren't sure if it was an alias or not, along with a rough description of the quirk, they were able to find something quickly. He reached into one particular stack of files and quickly pulled out a set of freshly printed pages, including a photograph of a large, heavily muscled man with tan skin, gray eyes, pale brown hair and what looked to be a permanent violent sneer across his lips. This is Zanki Shinizuku, dead at age 29 due to a broken neck while taking part in an illegal underground fighting ring roughly 102 years ago. He had a rap sheet a mile long at the time for a variety of violent crimes ranging from drunk and disorderly bar brawls to outright assault charges. His body went missing from the morgue a day later. It was presumed stolen and a new case was opened, but it went cold rather quickly with no discernible leads and was closed after the prescribed PRD of time went by. Both the instructors identified the photo as the man who attacked their dojo, albeit with a noticeable difference in coloration and hygiene. We also have surveillance camera footage of him approaching the dojo and it matches as well. He added another picture, this one clearly taken from a security camera, showing what was undoubtedly the same man, albeit with gray skin, yellow bloodshot eyes, and white-gray hair. Oh dear! The mammal of indeterminate species offered as he began to excitedly skim through the gathered pages at a truly astonishing rate, a gleeful look crossing his muzzle. Quirks are truly, as the youngsters like to say, bullshit. For such a thing to be possible is... He trailed off. And you say he defeated both instructors? Yes. Although from what we've gathered it wasn't any discredit to their capabilities. His quirk apparently gave him perfect control of his undead body, allowing him to ignore most forms of normal physical attacks. Tsukachi offered, grimacing in distaste at having to use the term undead in an official police investigation. Unfortunately, there was no other suitable word for what Zanki Shinizuku had become. Sometimes he really just hated how utterly weird the world could be these days. His ability to control dead cells granted him complete control over his body in that state, allowing him to arrest rot and repair damage with a thought, along with hardening his skin and musculature to a density comparable to some metals and even reshaping his skin to the point his could turn his limbs into cutting implements. I'm fairly sure most pro heroes would have had trouble dealing with him in a straight fist fight. And yet it was a child who managed to stop him. How? Nizu asked. According to the instructors, Shinizuku declared that he had been hired to permanently shut down the dojo, with his intentions being to defeat the masters, destroy the dojo and its sign, and injure the students to the point that the Enryu dojo could never rise again, stated Tsukachi coldly, sharing a distasteful look with Nizu, the two both sharing a similar view on any criminal that threatened children. The small mammal bristled in distaste at the thought. Some humans were simply beyond all hope. He quickly set the old anger to the side for now, motioning for Tsukachi to continue. Fortunately, one of his first targets, one Jiro Kyoka, had a very good friend with her, the detective continued. Her best friend, one Midoriya Izuku, stepped between them and tried to protect his friends, and the boy somehow succeeded beyond any and all possible expectations. He managed to land 2 blows against the assailant, albeit the first was only due to arrogance on Shinizuku's part where he freely offered the kid the first blow before catching it with his right hand. There seemed to be some strange interaction between the assailant's quirk and the young Midoriyas that caused the entirety of Shinizuku's arm to rapidly rot and liquefy off of his body after the initial impact. This caused him to panic and allowed Midoriya to land a second blow, a double hand strike to the man's upper body, which seemed to cause his quirk to go out of control and his entire body to begin to liquefy. It was then that Bushi-san and Ran-san managed to recover enough to deliver what could be called the final blow of the fight, pulping his entire body and preventing him from posing any further threat to the students. Well now, this is certainly a most fascinating case. Thank you ever so much for inviting me into it, Tsukachi-kun. Nizu offered, now honestly intrigued by everything he'd heard. He happily poured himself a third cup of tea. I believe I already have an idea of what might have caused the final death of Zanki the Relentless, but I will need to check a few things to confirm it. Can I see Midoriya-kun's quirk registration? The detective nodded, reaching for one of the stack of files and quickly thumbing through it to find the correct one. Of course, it is officially listed as Hamon and classified as an emitter type with both the enhancement and healing subcategories. Apparently, it allows him to generate a form of golden energy from his body. According to his file, the energy enhances his physical abilities, acts as a protective shield to deflect damage, and is even capable of rapidly accelerating the healing of people who are exposed to it. Here it is. Finally finding the file, he quickly passed it over to Nizu, who quickly opened it and began scanning through its contents. I should also mention that, since I was given this case earlier today, I've received more than a bit of pressure to close the case as quickly as possible and to follow the obvious conclusion that Midoriya Izuku is primarily responsible for the accidental death of Zanki Shinosuke and should be listed as a subject possessing a deadly quirk. Tsukachi offered with a grimace. And every bit of it that I can trace back has led to the Hero Public Safety Commission on some level, although I haven't been able to figure out exactly what department yet. I'd advise against trying to dig any deeper, Tsukachi-kun. Nizu advised absently as he stood up and grabbed several more files, pausing only occasionally to sip at or refresh his tea. The HPSC can be quite prickly about their internal matters, and I don't doubt they try to take punitive actions against a government employee sticking their nose too deeply into their affairs. I figured as much, the living lie detector agreed with a tired sigh. Luckily for all involved, I already have several lines of counter-arguments that will allow you to ignore any more such requests that you receive regarding this case. Nizu continued, looking up to grin toothily at the human. First, Zanki Shinosuke was already legally dead. His death certificate is right here, and by his own admission his body was merely a corpse being puppeted by his quirk. You cannot kill what is already dead. That is a legal fact after the last necromancer incident roughly 70 years ago. Second, it will be all but impossible for young Midoriya to repeat this feat against any other person using his quirk. Well, unless there is someone else that would count as undead out there. How do you figure? Tsukachi asked, perking up. With the evidence you've already gathered, any competent attorney could argue the second death of Zanki Shinosuke down to destruction damage of a body due to unexpected quirk interaction, a charge that any impartial judge would dismiss given the circumstances. Nizu stated authoritatively. Zanki the Relentless quirk, dead cell, only allowed him to manipulate and control dead cells, just as its name implies. Midoriya-kun's quirk registration file clearly states that his own quirk, Hamon, is capable of healing a variety of injuries and even revitalizing dying trees through exposure to its unique form of energy. That implies that the energy he creates is capable of revitalizing dying cells, possibly even temporarily restoring dead cells to life. Hamon is, quite literally, dead cell's antithesis, capable of fully countering and neutralizing its abilities. So, if the cells were brought back to life, then… Tsukachi worked through the logic and his eyes widened. Then dead cell would lose control of every cell affected by Hamon's energy, revitalizing the cells and removing the cohesion that was keeping them stable. And without dead cell to halt the aging process, those revitalized cells would rapidly putrefy as 100 years' worth of aging and degradation caught up with them in an instant. That's what happened to his arm, and I'm willing to bet that the second blow took longer because the target was so much larger and thus the effect was more spread out. It still broke his control over his quirk and allowed the masters to finish the job. Precisely. Nizu agreed, pleased as always that he was working with humans capable of at least following his train of deduction and logic. I sincerely doubt that there are very many people in the world as a whole, let alone Japan, that would possess a quirk that would have a similar interaction with Midoriya-kun's. I personally can only think of one such possibility here in Japan, and he lives in Okinawa. Well, that's a relief. Tsukachi offered as he sagged into his chair. Thank you for the assistance in the matter, Nizu. I'd like to think that I would have noted the negative interactions between Dead Cell and Hamon myself eventually, but the HPSC has been riding me constantly since I took the case. Even the captain has been a pain just to try and get the DMED politicians off his back. It's been a stressful day, to say the least. I think I will need to poke my head into the business of the Mizudafu police more often. The HPSC has no authority to try and exert pressure on the police force unless they're working a case involving an active duty pro-hero, which Midoriya Izuku is clearly not. This suggests some form bribery, brown-nosing, or blackmail being involved. Nizu stated, his voice hardening notably. I also believe that I need to schedule another discussion with the HPSC president to remind them, once again, of the limits that their office. Tsukachi winced slightly at the cold tone of his companion's voice. There had been something of a cold war going on between the Hero Public Safety Commission and Nizu ever since the high-spec quirk holder had been made the principal of UA High. Out of all the hero schools in Japan, the only one which didn't follow the HPSC's suggested course and guidelines was UA and, much to the frustration of Nizu's detractors, it had still constantly and consistently proved to churn out better, stronger heroes than any other hero academy in the nation. Even Shiketsu Academy and Ketsubutsu High, the other two members of the so-called Big Three Hero Academies of Japan, were both a distant second to UA, with CI All-Girls Academy, the only single-gender hero academy in Japan, as an even more distant third. Most, if not all, of UA's graduates usually made it into the top 200 of the hero rankings, with almost every single member of the current top 10 being UA graduates. Tsukachi wasn't in the know about exactly why Nizu and the HPSC were at loggerheads, but given how the committee often tried to throw its weight around, he could hazard a few guesses, none of them good. If you could type up a report of your findings and deductions, I'll do the same. With both of us behind it, I think I'll be able to close this case favorably without any harm to Midoriya-kun's record by the end of the day, tomorrow at the latest. The detective offered, deciding that it was time to get this case back on the rails again. I know that Mrs. Midoriya has been most anxious to get her son cleared of any wrongdoing, and she's being fully supported by Jiro Mika, the singer-songwriter, Jiro Kyotoku, her composer and husband, and the former battling hero, Stern Fist, Kendo Ichii. Sounds like the young man has a good little group looking out for him. Good children require a strong support network to grow properly. Nizu nodded, pleased to see that the boy seemed to already have some allies looking out for him. Have no fear, I shall have it done post-haste. With that, Nizu climbed down off the desk and towards the Nizu-sized computer that the precinct had prepared for his use whenever he was called in to assist with investigations, which, considering they were located in UA's backyard, was not too uncommon, and began to type away furiously. Smiling, Tsukachi joined in at his own computer. There was a young boy to exonerate after all. 2 days later, Midoriya Izuku's room, Midoriya residence. Izuku had first woken up just 10 minutes after landing his second blow against Zanki. He had been awake less than a minute before he was promptly glomped by a pair of relieved and crying girls. Both Kyoka and Itsuka, and he was finally getting used to calling them by their first names, had altered between calling him a brave idiot, a heroic moron, or just plain scolding him for putting himself into danger. Once his mother had arrived and found what he'd done, well, let's just say that Izuku would not be going anywhere but school or the dojo for the next month. Both Kyoka's and Itsuka's parents had stopped by yesterday to check in and thank him for protecting their daughters, which had caused both the aforementioned girls to blush and stammer. Izuku had been taken home before the police had arrived and had in fact spoken to one of the officers the next day, only having to answer a few questions, and thankfully never having to bring up the strange voice he'd heard, but his mother's worrying and anxious behavior over most of the following day had told him that there was still something bothering her. Then, rather abruptly, she'd received a phone call earlier today and all that stress and worry had seemingly melted away. He still wasn't sure what had happened. His mother had refused to explain, but as long as his mother was happier, then it was all to the good in his opinion. Now, sitting in his room, he let his mind wander as he watched the golden radiance of his Hamon danced over his fingers and hands as he gently guided his breathing into the rhythmic pattern that was becoming almost second nature to him. He had just beaten an opponent who was not only far larger and stronger than himself, but also had more combat experience than he'd likely be able to acquire in his entire lifetime. More than that, the man had literally dissolved into a putrid puddle of muck and bones right in front of him. By all rights, Izuku should have been horrified at what he'd seen, distraught at what he'd accidentally done, and otherwise completely full of angst, but he wasn't. At worst, he'd found the entire scene a bit nauseating due to the sights and smells involved, but his own actions weren't bothering him at all. He didn't understand it, but the second he'd laid eyes on the men that had stormed into the dojo, Izuku had been suffused with a sense of unease, like his very existence was unnatural. As if the undead thing in front of him needed to be destroyed. It was utterly ridiculous. He might have been only 9, but that was still old enough that things like undead weren't actually real. Zenki was simply a man with a particularly disturbing quirk and violent temperament, nothing more or less, and yet his quirk had reacted so violently to it that it caused Izuku to pause and think. The number of people in the world that his Hamon could react to so violently towards couldn't be that high. It simply could not be large enough to rouse such an instinctive distaste in him. Temporarily shaking away the strange thoughts that had been bothering him for the past day or so, Izuku tried to refocus on his current project, designing the first drafts of their hero costumes. He had always planned on designing his own costume, but now that he had 2 friends that wanted to be heroes as well, it had really gotten his creative juices going. Many attempts at drawing the ideas that had been bubbling up in his brain had been tossed out over the last year due to how kami-bead bad they'd been, perspective all over the place, poor scaling, and of course the physical differences between girls and boys being more than skin deep. Now though, he'd improved enough that his ideas were finally starting to come to life onto the paper, with the resulting sketches being surprisingly lifelike and well-drawn. His mother often said that he had a talent for drawing. He would argue that it was just the result of putting enough effort into it. When he discussed the idea of hero costumes, Itsuka had been particularly excited about explaining how she'd wanted her costume to differ from what her dad's had used back before he'd retired. Kendo Ichii, the battle hero, Stern Fist, had been forced into medical retirement after a particularly brutal fight with a villain had severely damaged the ligaments in one of his legs, forcing him to walk with a limp for the rest of his life. His costume had consisted of a reinforced karate gi, a large bandana both covering his hair and acting as a domino mask, and a set of steel-toed shoes. He had 3 designs ready that he wanted her to take a look at. The first was one he was fairly certain she'd say no to. It was basically a copy of her dad's costume with a few alterations to take her gender into account. The second was based off Itsuka's own personal ideas and consisted mostly of a reinforced chi-pao and domino mask. The third was his own creation and the one he was personally going to lobby for. It was similar to the second idea, but incorporated a pair of reinforced and slightly armored thigh-high boots to give her a bit of extra kick, and more importantly, a set of elbow-length reinforced gloves. He knew that ordinarily Itsuka couldn't wear gloves because most would be torn to shreds when she activated her big fist quirk, and reinforced ones could even damage her hands when she tried. However, just a few years ago the newest breakthrough from I-Island had started to appear in mainstream hero costumes, DNA-infused fabrics. Izuku didn't know how exactly they worked, but by taking hair and blood samples, they could create a number of unique fabrics that would actively blend and shift in response to a person's quirk. It was particularly popular for heroes with potent transformation quirks, since the fabrics would act as if they were a part of the wearer's body, growing, shifting, extending, and enlarging as the user's body did the same while retaining their normal properties. In Itsuka's case, the special fabrics would only be needed for the actual hand and wrist portions of the gloves. The rest could be made with mundane fabrics and armor in order to better protect her forearms. This would both maximize her protection and save money. As for Kyoka, she had actually been fairly relaxed about the entire idea, having only a vague idea of what she wanted her costume to look like or not look like, and a single idea for an inbuilt set of speakers as a support item to help amplify the range and power of her quirk. That had given Izuku an idea, and he had broached the subject with her dad and offered it to him for his opinion. It was going to take some time before it was ready to even show to Kyoka, but Kyotoku had really liked the idea and had gotten into contact with some people in the business to make it happen. His own costume, however, was what was causing him some hang-ups. The childish crayon-drawn images from his earliest dreams of heroics had all basically been him wearing different iterations of All Might's costumes, frizzy hair slicked up into antennae and all. However, ever since he had gained his own quirk, one that worked on in an entirely different way than whatever All Might's quirk was, he had decided he needed a costume that was his, rather than simply copying his idol. Liquids are still the best conductor for Hamon energy for whatever reason, with pure water being the absolute best. Izuku mused aloud, absently tapping his pencil against his forehead. Organic fabrics, leather included, are the second best, so something made of silk would likely be my best bet. High-purity metals are also good conductors, so any support item or reinforcements would need to be made with that in mind. Just about anything can have Hamon energy sent through it, but unless it is water, at least some of the energy's power will diffuse through the material. The better the material conducts Hamon energy, the less is lost and the more effective my Hamon techniques are. It had taken several years of careful experimentation to determine all of that information, but Izuku had a naturally analytical mind and had always loved dissecting quirks, making him well-suited for the task. His analytical abilities had only improved as he'd grown, encouraged by his teachers as the Enryu Dojo, who saw it as an excellent tool as both a martial artist and a hero. As Bushi-sensei had said, the better you can understand your opponent's strengths, the better you can find their weaknesses and the better you can exert your own strengths to claim victory. And yet, despite all of this information, he just couldn't find the inspiration to serve as the base of his own costume. Sighing in annoyance, Izuku got up before walking over and collapsing onto his bed, suddenly feeling utterly exhausted and deciding that a quick nap would be just the thing to help him sort things out. Seconds later and he was lightly snoring, while his mind was elsewhere. Izuku's dream. Where the heck am I? Izuku asked, looking around at the strange place that had suddenly replaced his room. It looked like some kind of saloon taken straight out of an Old West movie, a long bar with tables and chairs scattered around, and he was currently standing next to the largest table, taking up most of the center of the room and surrounded by at least a dozen chairs. "Saluti, young man." A voice, hauntingly familiar to Izuku's ears, suddenly spoke up with a slight Italian accent as a man suddenly walked in through the bar's swinging doors. He was a tall and muscular man, with dark brown hair and a perfectly trimmed mustache that seemed to accentuate his sharply angled face and bright blue eyes. He was dressed to the nines in a white and blue suit with a red waistcoat and a pale green necktie. The ensemble was completed with a black top hat with a checkered pattern covering the top portion. "I hope I find you well this fine evening." "Why, thank you for asking, sir." Izuku managed to stammer out through his shock, his mind quickly registering where he'd heard that particular voice and seen that face before. I am sorry if this is rude to ask, but are you the one who helped me fight against Zanki?" "Zanki?" the man responded, rolling the word on his tongue. "Ah, you mean that brutish zombie that accosted you and your young lady friends?" "See, that was I, but please allow me to formally introduce myself. I am Baron Will Antonio Zeppeli, a pleasure to finally meet you face to face, young man," he finished with a slight bow. "Midoriya Izuku, sir. The pleasure's mine and thank you for all your help." Izuku responded, bowing respectfully. Always good to meet a youngster with manners. Baron Zeppeli offered with a smile as he took a seat on one of the smaller tables near the center before waving to the seat opposite of him. "Please, take a seat, there is much we need to discuss, you and I." After Izuku took the offered seat, Zeppeli spoke again. "Tell me, young Izu, how old would you say I look to your eyes?" Izuku froze a bit at the unexpected question, but responded gamely. "I'd say mid-20s? 30 or so at the oldest." "I shall take that as a compliment, but I am in fact 50 years old." Zeppeli offered, laughing lightly as he corrected him. Hamon is a wondrous energy, and it has many benefits for those who practice with it. Once you reach full maturity, your aging will begin to slow to a crawl as long as your Hamon remains strong. My own master, Tunpetty, was over 150 years old when he passed, and he still looked like a man in his particularly healthy 70s from all that I have heard. That's incredible, the Verdette breathed out, blinking at what that could mean for him. If his aging process was slowed like that, it meant he'd likely be able to remain an active pro-hero for quite a while without slowing down. Then something occurred to Izuku about what he had just been told. Did you just say that you and your master could use Hamon? You both have the same quirk as me. Ah yes, this quirk thing that sets your iteration of Earth apart from the others. No, child. Baron Zeppeli replied with a gentle shake of his head. Where I come from, Hamon is a martial art, a way of fighting those things that lurk in the darkest depths of the night, vampires, zombies, and all other undead and their foul ilk. 5 years ago, when you had all but resigned yourself to fate but refused to be bowed by it and the power of the bully who you had once called your dearest friend, I was moved by your heart and reached out to infuse you with half of the Hamon energy that remained within me. It surprised me greatly when that energy sparked something within you and permanently became a part of you. In a sense, I passed my Hamon on to you, young man, and it became your quirk. Izuku stared at him for a moment, his mind reeling and trying to process what he was hearing. That one day had changed everything for him, and to find it was all due to the act of kindness of a stranger, there was really only one thing he could do. Thank you, he whispered out, tears gathering in his eyes as he bowed his head so deeply it bumped against the table. It was merely the right thing to do, Bambino. I could not rightfully call myself a gentleman if I allowed such a pure and honest soul, so akin to my own and that of my dear pupil, to fall into despair without extending my hand to help. Baron Zeppeli waved the thanks away with a smile. As I said before, however, you must learn to stand against such darkness, not without fear but in control of it. Fear will stammer and disrupt your breathing and thus impair the flow of Hamon through your body. You must not be fearless, for only insects are truly without fear, but you must be dauntless in face of it. Be brave. I was honestly more scared of what he would do to Kyoka-chan and Itsuka-chan if I didn't do anything, or wasn't able to stop him. Izuku confessed. Just standing by and doing nothing wasn't an option. You have a gentleman's noble soul and caring heart, my young friend, the Italian gentleman offered with a knowing smile. I came to you this night to offer what instruction I can in how to fully use the Hamon energy you now carry. Ways that you can use it to its best advantage, tricks to use its unique properties, and even how you might be able to kindle the light of Hamon in others. I can do that? Izuku asked, his mind awhirl with the possibilities. I could, as could every other skilled practitioner of Hamon back on my own version of Earth. Baron Zeppeli corrected him. I do not know if the people of your world could wield Hamon in the same way as mine, but only time will tell. I would caution you, however, not to attempt to bestow Hamon to people unless you are either pressed for time, or can absolutely trust them beyond a shred of a doubt. Ask me in your dreams once you have learned the technique, and I shall help you. Izuku stood up and bowed slightly. I'm looking forward to our lessons, Zeppeli-sensei. Later, when Izuku woke up after a good 3-hour nap, he smiled. Now he had an idea for his hero costume, at least. Just after the defeat of Zanki. Hidden location, Japan. I am honestly just disappointed, really. All for One offered slowly. The newest series of quirks that Dr. Garaki had provided were finally settled in and fully incorporated into All for One's vast web, and he had been restored to a certain point. He was now blind, his eyes had been crushed and utterly destroyed by All Might's final punch, the same punch that had left his skull little more than a mangled mess. Were it not for a few very specific quirks he'd acquired over the centuries, that blow would have been undoubtedly lethal, and no regeneration or healing quirk in the world was strong enough to undo the sheer amount of damage done to him, not after it had taken so long just for the doctor to stabilize him. As it was, he now had to suffer the indignity of constantly being forced to wear a mask with an inbuilt respirator when he was not directly hooked up to the doctor's life support equipment. Yes, It was becoming blatantly obvious that his ancient, broken shell of a body was fast approaching its ultimate end. Fortunately, he already had plans in motion to acquire a new one that would be not only young, powerful, and perfectly conditioned to carry All for One but would also be perfectly suited for ripping one for all from its current host. It would require a fairly large investment of time and resources to fully cultivate his newest project to perfection, but as one who had lived for centuries, All for One was a man who understood the value of patience and carefully cultivating investments. It would all be worth it in the end, of that he was sure. For now, I apologize, sire. The doctor that was standing before him, not Garaki, or as the other doctors knew him as, Tsubasa, offered hesitantly. Have no fear, you are not the one that carries the blame for Zanki's failure. Efo responded absently. Fear was a useful tool for controlling one's underlings, but it was a tool that had to be used precisely to get the best effect from it. Too little and those beneath him may forget their place, but too much and they would be too afraid to be of effective use, or they might do something truly foolish in an attempt to escape or avoid displeasing their master. Far too many villains fell because their minions were too terrified of them shooting the messenger that it let them be caught unaware by approaching threats. Zanki's blatant arrogance was his own undoing, thus his failure rests entirely on his own head. That is all there is to it. For now, there will be too much attention on that dojo and Ran Xiaoyu for a second attempt to be made to acquire her and her quirk within the time frame that we require. Were there any other shock absorption quirks that you know of? Weiss, my lord. There are over a dozen similar quirks in Japan alone, the doctor offered with a slight gulp. Ran Xiaoyu's version was simply the most compatible one with the project's current stipulations. All of the others are either too weak to suit Project Noma's primary directive or have activation requirements that we would need to work around. However, if we move to acquire several of them, then it should be well within your ability to edit and merge them into a single viable quirk for the project. Then that is simply what we shall do, good doctor. Look through your registry and select those quirks that have the qualities we need and I will make arrangement for them to be acquired. The Emperor of Darkness ordered. Project Nomu requires a shock absorption quirk capable of holding off all might strength, and it is a quirk that I have never bothered to acquire for myself. Rather, all of the copies of that specific type of quirk had been overwhelmed and destroyed by his clash with that Americana-obsessed idiot. So many wonderful quirks, each a work of art perfectly tailored to his needs by the power of his own quirk, all of them utterly ruined because of that smash-happy buffoon, or had been distributed to one or more of his minions over the years. And, unfortunately, the ones he had gifted couldn't be reclaimed since their holders had all been either killed or captured and sent to Tartarus while he was recovering from his near brush with death. He might have been able to recover their quirks from the corpses, but unfortunately his enemies seemed to know this as well and had made it standard procedure to cremate the bodies of any of his underlings that fell in battle. Breaking into Tartarus was also not an option at this time. It would require too many resources for too little gain, and it would announce his presence to the world and let the fools that dared defy him know that he had survived, something that he did not desire at this time. He was going to ensure that muscle-brained oaf suffered before he died. All Might had earned All for One's wrath like no one had managed to in centuries, and the Emperor of the Underworld was going to ensure that the world knew why one did not pious of the Demon Lord by the time he was through with him. It shall be done. The doctor quickly bowed before leaving the room. Alone again, All for One silently contemplated the death of one who should have not been able to die. Zanki Shinosuke had come to All for One's attention only a few months after his apparent death and reanimation, the newly undead martial artist's new state allowing him to completely wallow in his love of violence and combat and leading him on a binge of bloodthirst and destruction throughout several different cities. The reports he'd received from his web of informants about a supposedly dead low-level street fighter with a weak quirk suddenly coming back to life with a new and far more powerful ability, all without any involvement from him, had piqued his curiosity enough for him to personally investigate. What he'd found was a truly unique quirk unlike any other he'd encountered before, something that had utterly fascinated the quirk connoisseur within him. It was honestly a shame that the quirk actually required its host to physically die in order for it to fully activate, or All for One would have gladly taken it for himself then and there. As it was, he had become a patron for the newly renamed Zanki the Relentless from then on, partially because the violent brute was an extremely effective leg breaker when called upon and partially just to keep such an intriguing quirk close at hand. Zanki himself had been both low-level enough. The undead battle maniac was simply too volatile to risk bringing him any closer to his organization other than as a ready and reliable source of hired muscle, and had enough base cunning. It was honestly astounding how easy it was to make yourself completely disappear for a few months when you did not need to eat, drink, or even breathe, that he was able to escape All Might and his allies' hunts. And yet, shortly after taking his first job for the Dark Emperor of Japan in close to 2 years, something had managed to kill the zombified fighter a second time. Unfortunately, thanks to All Might's alliance with the police officer that had earned the title of Truth Man, they had managed to ferret out almost all of his agents within the Japanese police force, and all of them were now residing in Tartarus. Apparently even the rat and those dunderheads in the HPSC could agree on something, and that was willingly serving him basically amounted to terrorism and merited a life sentence in the most secure prison in the world. A part of him was honestly flattered that the threat he represented was apparently enough to bring even such bitter enemies together. Those few that remained were either too highly placed to be seen digging into a minor case like this without RSNG suspicion, or were not close enough to Mizudafu, whose police department had been particularly hard hit in All Might's purges, to be able to directly involve themselves in the case. So, he had little knowledge of the details of the case itself, let alone how someone had managed to kill that which was already dead. Regardless of the matter, whoever had ended the existence of Zanki the Relentless had interfered with his plans. That was not something that the Emperor of the Underworld could allow to go unanswered. Still, he was not in the habit of acting without gathering proper information. One did not survive for over 2 centuries by being bullheaded after all, particularly when he was already operating at a less than optimal capacity. No, he would be patient for now and let things lie fallow. Let the incident drift from the minds of all involved while he rebuilt his network of informants. Then, in a few years' time, he would look into the matter again. Whoever had interfered with his plans could rest well tonight, but their future was far from safe. That was simply fact. 3.5 years later, April. Sarasudo Junior High, Mizudafu. Izuku hummed slightly as he picked a desk in his new classroom. It was the first day of the new school year and he was finally starting junior high. Better yet, both of his best friends, Kendo Itsuka and Jiro Kyoka, had decided to attend the same school as him, which was several different kinds of awesome. After the Dojo Destroyer incident just under 4 years ago, there had actually been a brief PRD where it looked like the Enryu Dojo would be shut down due to the negative press caused by the incident. Then Itsuka's father, a retired pro-hero formerly known as the Battling Hero, Stern Fist, and Kyoka's mother, a popular local musician, had both given interviews absolving the Bushi couple and Ran Xiaoyu of any blame for the incident. Kendo Ichiai had gone so far to state that he himself would have had been hard-pressed to stop a villain with the kind of abilities that Zanki possessed, and pointed out that smearing the dojo's good name was exactly what the ones who had hired a brutal and dangerous thug like Zanki the Relentless to attack the dojo and its students had wanted in the first place. Jiro Mika had spoken more in favor of the dojo master's actions, pointing that both attending instructors had willingly put their lives and safety on the line to protect their students even against a monstrous threat that neither could hope to defeat. She had pointedly reminded the world that neither women were trained pro-heroes. Instead, they were simply martial artists who were facing off against a very dangerous criminal with a powerful quirk that he was more than happy to use against anyone who got in his way. The dojo might have still lost some students, but it never got as bad as it could have been, and new students had joined after the incident had settled. In the end, the Enryu Dojo had survived the incident mostly unchanged. "Hey Izuku!" Itsuka called out in greeting as she stepped into the classroom, quickly sliding into the seat directly to his right, while Kyoka quietly took the one to his left. They likely wouldn't be able to keep their current seats because of the seating chart, but for now they could just enjoy each other's company until classes officially started. "Morning, Itsuka." Izuku smiled back before turning to his other friend. "Morning, Kyoka." "Yo." The punk girl offered a lazy wave in return before yawning. Kyoka, he had learned over the years, was very much not a morning person. As they chatted, Izuku silently mused about how much the three of them had changed over the past 4 years. Itsuka had hit a growth spurt just under 2 years ago and had shot up like a weed, much to her annoyance. It had taken a while for her to adjust to her newly increased height and reach, as well as her other developments. Kyoka, on the other hand, hadn't changed all that much, something that honestly depressed the young rocker after she'd watched her female friend blossom. It certainly didn't help that Midoriya had hit Itsuka like a runaway truck and that, even now, she now had the most womanly figure in their class outside their teachers. Izuku himself was slightly taller than Kyoka now, but still a bit shorter than Itsuka, which was kinda irksome. His mother had mentioned that his father hadn't actually gotten his final growth spurt until his last year of high school, so there was still hope in that regard, but it was still a bit annoying. Hey, isn't that big test to establish your own style going to be this evening? Itsuka asked, a grin on her lips. Yeah. The verdette agreed with a nod. Kanzashi-sensei herself is going to be the one testing me, so I gotta be at my best. Ouch. Kyoka winced. Bushi Kanzashi could be downright brutal when it came time to push her students to their limits. Man, that is going to be all kinds of fun, she added sarcastically. Snickering slightly at his friend's sass, Izuku couldn't help but briefly think of his most hidden teacher, the spirit of Baron Zeppeli. The ghostly instructor had been teaching him the ancient martial arts that was associated with Hamon in his own world, Sendo, way of the hermit. Rather than a proper fighting style, Sendo seemed to be more of a general approach toward combat itself and an outlook to take while fighting, as well as a focus on understanding the nature of Hamon and how to utilize it in battle, which the practitioner would then develop into actual techniques on their own. Baron Will Antonio Zeppeli's actually fighting style itself seemed to be mostly based around the martial arts he had learned from the same Tibetan monks that had originally taught him how to use Hamon, whereas his student Jonathan Joestar had instead apparently learned to incorporate Hamon primarily in combination with his training as a proper English boxer, with a few kicks incorporated that he'd picked up from the street fights he had been involved in during his rougher years. Izuku's own fighting style had developed into primarily a mix of Gosaku-style karate that he had learned from Masuwa-sensei, Chun-style Tai Chi taught to him by Kanzashi-sensei, In-style Bagwazang which Ran-sensei had taught him, and the ancient Sendo which he had learned from Baron Zeppeli, with small aspects of Yang, Wu and Sun styles of Tai Chi that his first mentor had helped him learn, and some Shotokan-style karate that he'd picked up from training with Itsuka, mixed in. Izuku had taken to calling the slowly forming martial art Gendai Sendo, modern way of the hermit, in respects to the Kodai Sendo, ancient way of the hermit, that his hidden mentor had originally learned. In no small thanks to the invisible guiding hand of the highly experienced martial artist and warrior that was Baron Zeppeli, he had been able to smoothly mix all of these different martial arts forms into a new and singular style far faster than nearly anyone had expected. So much so that his first mentor was now intent on testing his newly born style, a test that most didn't take until they were at least 18, to see if Gendai Sendo was ready to be formally added to the official list of derived mixed martial arts that hung from one wall of the Enrya dojo. His mother and both of his friends' parents, as well as his friends themselves, were going to come and watch, which was honestly only making Izuku more nervous. Aside from once or twice when he was first starting, Midoriya Izuku had never attended any of his martial arts classes, although he did join her exercise Tai Chi classes often enough. As the teacher came in and led them all out towards the orientation ceremony, Izuku's mind was still miles away on the test that he would be going through after school and wondering just how it would turn. After school. Enrya Dojo. Midoriya Izuku was happily chatting with Itsuwa and Mika as they sat and waited for the match to start. She had grown closer to the other two mothers over the years after their children had become friends. She still met up and spent time with Mitsuki every so often, mostly to let her old friend vent her complaints about Katsuki still being a foul-tempered little brat, and refusing to grow the F up, to use her own wording. Oh, the boy had certainly made some progress. He was verifiably less of a violent thug in the making than he had been back when she and Mitsuki had first separated their children, but he was still worryingly aggressive and hostile. She honestly couldn't blame her old friend for being worried about her son's future. Have the pair of them still not made their move on Izuku? She asked, keeping her voice low enough so that neither of the nearby girls would overhear. Kyoka's been a bit self-conscious as of late, particularly since PBRDY started to work its dark magic on Itsuka. It looks like my daughter will be taking after me when it comes to body type and growth rate, Mika noted with a shake of her head. As much as she likes and admires Itsuka, I'm afraid that her recent growth spurts have left my daughter more than a bit intimidated and jealous. And Itsuka is absolutely terrified of the idea of alienating either of her best friends. Itsuwa added with a sigh. Izuku-kun and Kyoka-chan are the closest friends that she's ever had. She had a few problems making friends her age back in Chiba thanks to her tomboy streak, and she really doesn't want to lose either of them. And meanwhile, Izuku is completely oblivious to the fact that his two best friends are both crushing on him. Inko finished with a shake of her head. I know that boys are supposed to mature a bit slower than girls, but this is still plenty of time left for him to grow into it. Let them keep being kids for now, I say. Kendo Ichii grumbled, sounding exasperated by the gossiping of the three women. The former pro hero wore a set of worn, battered, but clean karate gi that everyone present knew had once been a part of his hero costume. Knowing Izuku-kun, once he does figure it out, the kid won't be able to do anything about it anyway. Let him at least get into Yui first, then the kid worrying about being pursued by our daughters. Gotta agree with the pro on this one. Kyoto-ku agreed with a nod. I'm just bummed that I'll never be able to give the shovel speech I've been practicing for years. Not after he protected Kyoka-chan from that Demed zombie. His wife just rolled her eyes at her husband's attitude. While the adults had been talking amongst themselves, Kyoka and Itsuka were both eyeing them warily from across the hall. Both girls had a feeling that they should be very glad that they couldn't hear just what they were talking about. So, do you think that Izuku will be able to do it? Itsuka asked, still keeping a careful eye on her mother. Once he manages to get going, he should be just fine. Kyoka answered bluntly, giving her dad the stink eye, some unnameable instinct telling her that he just said something stupidly embarrassing. The question is if he will actually manage to get started before Sensei knocks him out. The Orangeette nodded, agreeing with her friend's point. Even after all this time, Izuku was still annoyingly non-combative at times. He was fine with friendly spars most of the time and when he actually felt threatened, but stuff like test matches and challenges were still one of his biggest weaknesses at the moment. After a few minutes, Izuku marched robotically out of the boys' changing room, his face and posture clearly proclaiming just how nervous he actually was about this. Kanzashi merely offered her student a reassuring smile as she stepped into her position opposite of him in the sparring ring. Bushi Masao gave both his student and his fellow masters a calm nod as he stepped just inside the center of the ring before drawing himself up. Today's match is to determine if the mixed martial arts style developed by Midoriya Izuku, the Gendai Sendo, has reached a level worthy of being added to the Enryu Dojo's honor roll. Victory in this fight is only optional. What matters is that the creator of the style demonstrates that he has a full understanding and development of his style to the satisfaction of the examiner. He stated formally, "Examiner, are you prepared to begin?" "I am." Kanzashi agreed with a nod. "Midoriya, are you ready?" Masao asked a bit more carefully. The green-haired boy took a deep cleansing breath, held it for a moment, before letting it out. "Hi, Sensei," he agreed. "Then both of you, bow to your opponent." The karateka ordered both of them. Master and student quickly folded their hands into position and then bowed to one another, just deep enough that it was polite. Bowing too deeply before a match began could be dangerous depending on the type of opponent you were facing, so the Enryu Dojo, as a place that embraced practical martial arts, favored polite but shallow bows, even between teacher and student. "Assume your stances," the bulk-up Quirk user continued, raising a single arm and taking a step back out of the ring. With a flowing elegance, both Izuku and Kanzashi assumed similar starting stances. Kanzashi slipped into a neutral stance from the Chin style of Tai Chi, one that favored neither attack nor defending. Izuku, on the other hand, fell into a slightly modified version of an offensive stance of the same style. To the experienced eyes of both masters in attendance, the stance was slightly more rigid than what would be expected of a Tai Chi style. "Fighters, Kime!" Masao barked, chopping his arm down and officially beginning the match. Almost instantly, Izuku was enveloped in the glowing aura of his Hamon Quirk's energy. After 8 years of training and countless hours of practice, Izuku had learned to utilize the breathing techniques that allowed him to use his quirk freely and effectively, almost instinctively. He had trained hard to be able to use those techniques at any moment he might need them, and particularly while he was fighting. In a sudden surge of motion, the green-haired preteen leapt forward to attack, aiming a punch at his teacher's chest. With a single flowing usage of the Kekkei defensive method, Kanzashi smoothly redirected the blow. Izuku didn't even slow down, instead twisting with the movement and stepping forward into her space and slipping a palm blow directly into her gut. Amplified by his quirk, the relatively light blow was still strong enough to break her stance and send her stumbling back a couple of steps. "Ho, that wasn't a Tai Chi technique, that actually looked like Bagwazang, I think," Ichii offered with a curious eyebrow raised. He knew that Izuku studied both Tai Chi and Karate, but hadn't known he'd also learned Bagwazang as well. Izuku's style is supposed to be a mix of several different styles of Tai Chi, some Karate, Bagwazang, and some fourth martial art that he is being particularly tight-lipped about. Inko offered, even as Kanzashi changed stances. She didn't recognize it, fighting did not interest her in the least, but it was a more offensive stance from the Wu style. Even Misao and Kanzashi haven't been able to recognize it from the bits they've seen. According to both of them, it is honestly amazing that Izuku has managed to take all of that and form it into a single coherent fighting style so quickly. A fourth style that even a pair of martial arts masters of their caliber can't recognize? The pro hero hummed in surprise. "I'll have to keep an eye on that." The fight continued for some time while Izuku demonstrated a nice seamless ability to switch between Karate, Tai Chi, and Bagwazang technique and stances. However, Kanzashi had been the one who had helped him form the basis of his new style, which, combined with her far overwhelming amount of experience, allowed her to easily keep pace with Izuku's enhanced speed and strength. Then something happened. Izuku tried launching another straight punch at her, with Kanzashi easily stepping backwards to dodge, only for Izuku's arm to extend outward after her, crackles of golden lightning dancing along its length. The unexpected extension caught the Tai Chi master off guard, though her reflexes were fast enough that she still managed to brace her forearms in front of her in time to block and mitigate some of the blow's force. Ichii actually winced at the sight. Izuku-kun just completely dislocated his arm and overstretched every tendon in his arm with that move. How is he not on the ground screaming in pain right now? Izuku calls it his zoom punch, and it is all thanks to his Hamon quirk. The self-healing effect it generates is strong enough to easily reset his arm, restore any lost cartilage, and heal any damage to his tendons, all while mostly numbing the pain of the injury. Inko explained, not looking at all happy even as she watched her son's arm instantly reset itself. The doctors have all confirmed that Hamon's ability to self-heal is absolutely extraordinary, nearly on par with some high-level regeneration quirks, and that it should fix just about any form of physical injury without lasting effect. I still wish he wouldn't use it like that. Having a trick like that up his sleeve could be a real lifesaver for a pro hero, particularly if he can use it without any negative side effects or consequences. Ichii disagreed. Most villains will take one look at Hamon and see it as just another booster quirk. Having something unorthodox like that zoom punch will catch a lot of them completely off guard and give him an opening. Sunlight Yellow Overdrive. Izuku shouted out, his golden aura blazing bright for a moment as he surged forward with an absolute barrage of punches in a classic rush attack. The technique, which Izuku described as using a sudden, concentrated surge of Hamon energy to briefly enhance his speed and strength even further, was difficult for even someone on Kanzashi's level to deal with due to the sheer speed that Izuku was now capable of punching at. Pushing her Kekkei technique to its natural limit, the master of the 5 main styles of Tai Chi managed to fend off all but one of the flurry of blows, which slammed right into her diaphragm. Given that Sunlight Yellow Overdrive enhanced not only the speed of Izuku's blows but also their strength and force as well, that single blow was enough to send Kanzashi skidding backwards several steps while she desperately essayed in several deep breaths to recover. That's enough, she called, dropping her stance and raising an arm to halt Izuku before he could continue. I have seen more than enough proof. I fully accept Gendai Sendo Ryu as both ready and more than worthy of being added to the Enryu Dojo's honor roll. Izuku froze in shock for a second before breaking into a wide, excited smile. Almost immediately afterwards he was tackle-hugged by an ecstatic Itsuka who was swiftly joined by Jiro. The trio of preteens were too busy celebrating to notice their mothers taking out their phones and snapping a quick dozen pictures before quickly hiding them away again with a practiced efficiency. Minutes later, Izuku watched, filled almost to the point of bursting with pride, as a wood-burned nameplate bearing the kanji of his style, along with a notation to him as the style's creator, was placed on the wall holding the honor roll. "Ha! Knew you had it in you, Izuku-kun," Masao offered with a laugh, slapping the small boy on the shoulder with enough force to bend him over slightly. "It's honestly a shame that a great part of your style seems to rely on using your quirk. It looks like a good solid and practical style. Not to mention that strange fourth style you've been picking up. The one you've been keeping under your hat for so long." Izuku let out a sigh. His masters had been curious about that for a while now, but he had come up with a story that had just enough truth to it that he hoped he could sell it. It's actually based on some very old styles of Tibetan martial arts. I met someone who claimed to be a practitioner and researcher of ancient martial arts while I was practicing with Hamon in the park one day not long after the Zanki incident, and they noticed how my quirk and fighting style relies on breathing techniques. He honestly seemed fascinated by my quirk, and he even offered me a book on a particular series of styles that were supposedly specialized in using breath control to bring out the body's full potential. That got me a bit curious, so I looked through it. It was fascinating, and I pretty much memorized most of it over the course of a few weeks. Then one night, the book just seemed to vanish. I don't know if it was his quirk or something, but some kind of timed or maybe conditional recall quirk. Interesting. Masuo mused aloud. I can certainly see how a style that focuses heavily on breathing techniques would catch your interest. I can also see why you've only incorporated a few pieces of it into your own style. Learning a style from a teacher and self-instruction are two very different kinds of beasts. Yeah, I'm sorry I never showed it to you and Kenzashi-sensei, but I guess I got lost in my own head again. By the time I thought to, the book had already vanished. The vedette offered apologetically. Bah? No harm, no foul, I say. Just be careful about stuff like that in the future. There is a lot of nonsense out there that some people try and pass off as martial arts. The large man instructed. Wouldn't want you to end up trying something that gets you hurt become of some gibberish a random kook came up with. Hi, sensei. Izuku ducked his head, acknowledging the gentle rebuke. Good to hear. Now I think your mother is already planning a celebration, so you had best go get changed. The large martial artist encouraged his student, who hastily bowed and then hurried off. That kid is going to go far. Masao chucked as he briefly returned his attention to the dojo's honor roll. Including Izuku's newly placed plate, there were now a dozen wooden plates mounting the wall, each of which belonged to a famous martial arts style in the modern age that followed the same path as the Enryu dojo, to teach martial arts to any and all without discrimination or favor, to the quirked and quirkless alike. That kind of mentality was getting rarer and rarer with each year. Quirkism was starting to become a bigger and bigger part of their modern society at a level that most people didn't even realize. Only those that he and his wife deemed worthy in both skill and spirit ever got the opportunity to earn themselves a place on the wall. Not all of them were even former students of the dojo. One in particular, the Gunhead Martial Arts, founded by the battle hero, Gunhead, was near the top of the wall in a place of honor. He was one of the few pro heroes these days that was just as much a martial artist as he was a hero, someone that relied not only on his quirk to fight, but on his strength and his skill as well, unlike what was so common these days. Izuku is going to show them all why the martial arts remains such a vital skill after the advent of guns, and why it remains so even with the rise of quirks, the karate master thought with a proud smile. Heh, those asshats in the Hero Public Safety Commission aren't going to know what hit them when he shows up. Later. Living room, Ran Xiaoyu's apartment, Muzudafu. Biting her lip, the Chinese martial artist reread the letter that she had received from her family. The writer, her father no doubt, had been utterly blunt and to the point. She was to submit herself to the will of the family on pain of death. She had a month to set her affairs into order, and then the Branch family would be dispatched to either escort her home or bring back her head. "Father, you have truly stopped seeing me as person, haven't you?" Xiaoyu thought sadly, a tired sigh leaving her lips. Yan Gaoren, her father and the head of the Yan family, a powerful family with roots dating back to the days of Imperial China, had never been a particularly compassionate man. His position demanded a certain level of harshness and cold detachment after all, but he was at least loving when it came to his family and particularly his children and wife. That was until his wife, Yan Yunying, had died in an attack launched by a rival family when Xiaoyu had been only 12. After that incident, her father's heart had seemingly turned to stone, treating even his formerly beloved children with nothing but harsh expectations and clipped demands. In her father's case, the old wisdom really did speak the truth. Heartless men were once the ones who had loved the deepest. Her father had been hopelessly besotted with her mother since the moment he had first laid eyes on her, if one was to believe her mother's old stories anyway. She had been the light of his world, the spark that made his spirit sing, and the passionate fire that fueled his very soul. When she had been stolen from him, all that remained was a hollow puppet full of cold darkness, simply following the motions of the living in the name of his position and family honor. There was no love or familial affection left in him, merely the cold expectations that were demanded for the good of the family. What Xiaoyu couldn't understand was why her father was even bothering to try and force her back after he had been the one to banish her in the first place. She had 5 siblings, 2 from her own mother, Zhang and Fei, and 3 from her father's concubines, Chen, Xiaomei, and Yunfei. She was the only one of the 5 to possess a passive mutation quirk. All of her siblings had instead inherited one of the active emitter or transformation quirks that her family favored. She was simply the youngest daughter born of her mother and the middle sibling of the 6, which made her father's sudden overbearing demands all the more puzzling. She was simply a banished girl that had nothing to offer the Ran family, so why? "You look completely and utterly lost, Jejia, elder sister." A familiar voice, one that she hadn't heard in nearly 5 years now, suddenly brought her out of her thoughts. Xiaoyu instantly started to her feet, turning to face the voice and falling into a combat stance quicker than most people could blink. Leaning against her living room wall was Xiaomei. The confused holder of the shock absorption quirk whispered out in stunned disbelief at the sight of her younger sister. The two shared similar looks, both having taken after their shared father's side of the family, though Xiaomei was bustier and a bit shorter than Xiaoyu. Both had inherited their father's slate-gray eyes. "What are you doing here?" "I've been banished. If our father ever learns that you have sought me out, he'll dash." "You still worry more for other people than you do yourself. Some things truly never change." Xiaomei chuckled mirthlessly before offering her sister a sad smile. "Jejia, father is completely serious about killing you should you refuse to bow to his wishes this time. The Branch family members that will come for you are going to be armed with bladed weapons specifically to overcome your quirk and ensure that they can do just that." Xiaoyu's eyes narrowed at that, reminded of her brief battle with that monstrous brute a few years ago. "I never doubted that father was serious about this. What I cannot comprehend is why it is happening at all. He was the one who banished me after I refused to marry that utter swine Wang Qilong. Father never goes back on his decisions, so why is he attempting to bring me back? Zhang, Chen, and Yunfei are all dead." Xiaomei stated bluntly, the cold words making her elder sister almost stagger in shock. "Dead? That? No, that can't. They can't be." Xiaoyu murmured in disbelief for a moment before shaking herself back to reality. "How? Our brothers were all capable and skilled martial artists, and each possessed a quirk of not inconsiderable power honed under a lifetime of training and teaching. They would not have. The Su family decided to make a large push about half a year after you left China. They hired snipers, hitmen, and bomb makers, dishonorable filth of every stripe, and had them all aiming for a single strike in the hopes of decapitating our Yen family in a single day. Father and I both managed to survive the attempts made on us, but our brothers were not so lucky. They were murdered. the younger woman spat out, naming the same family that was responsible for the murder of Xiaoyu's mother. It was a decision that they soon came to regret. Our Yen family has spent the better part of the last few years ensuring the rats of the Su family and any others involved in the attack were wiped out utterly and completely. Oh no! Xiaoyu murmured sadly, mourning her brothers. They not been perfect, but they had still been decent men, and her brothers besides. Zhang had been a blowhard with a big mouth, but he was also a passionate cook that loved to see people enjoy his meals. Chen was a fight-happy brawler, but he was also a lively and playful soul with a soft spot for children. Yunfei had been unapologetic womanizer down to his very core, but he had also always been the kindest of her siblings. None of them deserved to die to such dishonorable tactics. But still, what does that have to do with father wanting me back, even with our brothers gone? That still leaves you and Fei to carry on the family. Wait, you never mentioned Fei surviving the attack, she didn't? Fei is still alive for now. She's currently hiding somewhere in Mongolia from what our family's trackers have found. Xiaomei spat onto the floor. She fled the same day as the Su's attempted attack. When we searched her rooms, we found that she was the one who had sold out all of our locations on that day for 5 million yuan. Fei, why? The banished woman whispered, once more sent reeling from the revelation. Her elder, full-blooded sister had always been such a quiet woman. Why would she? You know as well as I did that Fei always had a terrible inferiority complex, Jie. She always felt that she was overshadowed by the rest of us. Xiaomei retorted coldly. Always the least talented in the martial arts and the weakest quirk amongst our family. Never with enough work ethic to actually try and improve herself. Instead, she merely wallowed in bitterness at her own weakness. She apparently had enough of being constantly trodden upon, and decided to sell out all of us in a fit of jealousy and spite. Now she has a lifespan that will be measured in weeks. I personally hope she gets some joy from her blood money. It will be the last she ever experiences in this world. And that leaves you as the heiress to the Yen family. Xiaoyu finally offered shakily, forcibly pulling herself together. There would be time to mourn and process everything later. So again, why am I being called back? An heir and a spare. I think that those words best summarize father's current line of thinking, her sister answered with a sigh. He wishes to have you back at hand in case something was to happen to me while our family is still rebuilding. He has become even colder since you left, Jie. He has also lost some of his senses as well. Xiaoyu snapped out, dropping back into her seat. I can't very well be his spare. If the branch family takes my head, now can I? I agree, and I can see that you are much happier now with this new life you have made for yourself. You seem to enjoy being a martial arts teacher. Xiaomei offered. Jie, I came here tonight to try and convince you to formally divorce yourself from the family. Xiaoyu's eyebrows shot up as she turned to her half-sister in shock. To do what Xiaomei was suggesting was to turn her back on her family formally, legally, and permanently, to the point that she wouldn't even be able to acknowledge Xiaomei as her blood sister any longer. She recovered her bearings after a moment though. And how will that help me? I sincerely doubt that father will acknowledge any declaration I make. He has always utterly scorned any official government intervention into what he considers family matters. Her sister grimaced, but nodded. I am aware, but by outright denying him in such an obvious and unquestionable way, you will force him to confront you in person rather than allowing him to use the Ren family as pawns. Why are you trying to help me, Mimi, little sister? Xiaoyu finally asked the question that had been weighing on her since her sister had appeared. If my memory serves me, you were never that fond of me before I was banished. She and Xiaomei had not gotten along. Xiaomei had been jealous of the attention that she, Zhang, and Fei had received as her father's legitimate children, while she had felt pushed to the sidelines as the daughter of a CNCBN. Xiaoyu had tried to bridge the gap between them before, but her half-sister had always stubbornly rebuffed her attempts. That was before father finally turned his full attention onto me. It turns out that what I had always wanted was nothing like I had dreamed it to be. Xiaomei answered with a grimace. Now that I have been named the heiress, he is even worse. I have come to regret how I treated you back then, Jie. I let a child's blind adulation for their father color my perspectives and hurt you because of it. Shower. Xiaoyu sighed softly. But this plan means that we will become all of strangers to one another. I have my issues with father and would honestly be glad to be rid of him after all he has done, but I would not wish to cut you out of my life as well. We cannot have everything that we want in this life, Jie, the current Yen family heiress offered softly. I too do not wish to lose my one remaining loyal sibling, but I would also much rather see you alive and not back under father's yoke. We are all of the family that we have left after all. Obviously, she wasn't counting Faye in that. I have put a great weight onto your shoulders tonight, so I think I should retreat for the time being. Xiaomei offered, standing up straight again. I hope that you will heed my advice, Jie. I know how capable you are with the martial arts, but the Ren family will be able to overcome you through sheer force of numbers if nothing else. Pressing a hand against the wall, Xiaomei activated her own quirk. A jade-green, ovoid doorway appeared, rippling with a darker-colored energy as Xiaomei stepped through it before vanishing again a few minutes later. That was Yen Xiaomei's quirk, Jade Portal, an emitter. Quirk that allowed her to travel between 2 points in an instant as long as she could conjure a strong mental image of her destination. Now what do I do? Xiaoyu muttered, hands fsng in her skirt,